Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show. Apologies for the late start. What time is it? What time is it? What time is it? 8 minutes, yeah. Apologies for the late start. I needed coffee, and I got to be honest, I'm dragging ass today. By the way, I was on Sabby Sab's show yesterday, Sabrina. She was nice enough to bring me on. We had a really good talk. I think we talked for about an hour. On all things Ukraine, Russia, Trump administration. We even got into a little domestic politics. So definitely check her out. That came out at 7 p.m. Eastern time. She's cool people, and she has a really good show. So definitely check her out. And she's always been nice to me, which, it's always, from my point of view, a good thing. Interesting news. Fascinating news. I would even go so far as to say. So I'm trying to figure out where to start. So let's start here. Russia has been. No, I guess we have to start with Iran. Let's start with Iran. So Supreme Leader Ayatollah, let's go back just a little bit. Witkoff gave a written proposal to Iran. Now, people were speculating, okay, what is in that proposal? Considering that the Trump administration for the longest time kept saying, we're not going to accept Iran enrichment, we want a Libyan model, etc. But then Axios came out and reported, hey, Donald Trump is going to accept limited enrichment. Then Trump comes out and says, to be clear, no enrichment. So this seems like a contradiction. It's not exactly a contradiction. What Donald Trump is effectively allowing, and this is according to the New York Times, this is according to Axios, and you have to read somewhat between the lines because it makes it clear there's not really a distinction between the two. But the difference in that distinction is why this is a dead letter proposal. Now, they're supposed to be going into, sixth round of negotiations coming up very soon. But as this stands, dead letter. Let me explain why. So right here, U.S. proposes interim step in Iran nuclear talks, allowing some enrichment. Axios is reporting something very similar right here. U.S. nuclear deal allows Iran to enrich uranium. All right, let's go to the New York Times piece first. Because this needs to be nailed down as to why this is a non-starter. The Trump administration is proposing an arrangement that would allow Iran, first, right there, allow. Who the F are you? Who the F are you? I don't know why the New York Times didn't say that. Trump is going to allow it, and then in parentheses, who the F is Trump to allow anything in a sovereign country? Let's keep going. While the United States and other countries work at a more detailed plans that intended to block Iran's path to a nuclear weapon, but to give it access to fuel for nuclear fuel plants. There's the other problem word, give. So you expect Iran to build nuclear power plants and be dependent upon you to give it the fuel for those power plants, you and the other quizzling governments, UAE, Saudi Arabia, all of which are effectively vassals of the United States. You really expect that, do you? Is that what you expect? This is what I mean when I said American point of view. Nobody who's sitting on the moon looking at events, looking at the way the U.S. behaves and the way that its quizzling governments behaves, Saudi Arabia could turn around tomorrow and be against Iran again, right? So why would Iran, who is self-sufficient, allow that? There's that, right? New York Times is oblivious to New York Times. Let's keep going. The proposal amounts to a diplomatic bridge intended to maneuver beyond the current situation in which Iran is rapidly producing nuclear near bomb-grade uranium to reach the U.S. goal of Iran no enrichment on its own soil. Red line. So before you even get into deep into the article, within the first paragraphs, we've hit red line, dead letter. Under the proposal, the United States will facilitate the building of nuclear power plant reactors for Iran. Again, who the F are you? Why would Iran want an enemy's help? Because that's what the U.S. is, an enemy. Why would it want an enemy's help to build nuclear power plants when Russia, country that it works with, it's in BRICS with, is in diplomatic alignment with, military security alignment with, it's right there. Who the F are you? This keeps coming up. To negotiate the construction of enrichment right here. Under the proposal, the United States will facilitate the building of nuclear power reactors for Iran. Who the F are you? Negotiate the construction of enrichment facilities managed by a consortium of regional countries. Once Iran begins receiving any benefit from those promises, it would have to stop all enrichment in the country. Why would it do that? Red line. I hope you get my point. All of these things are red lines. This is nonsense. Again, this is a U.S. point of view. This notion that the U.S. is some kind of trustworthy actor. You are an enemy. You're going to be treated as an enemy. You have no credibility at all. Why are you pretending as if you do? The idea of a regional consortium would essentially wrap Iran in a bear hug with countries that might include the United States, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and others, allowing the production of low-grade nuclear fuel for power plants while seeking to ensure that Iran is not enriching fuel on its own for a bomb. Okay, well, for one, there's no evidence that it's doing that. Two, who the F are you? Why do you think you're going to be trusted in any such way? The notion that you're going to, A, help Iran build a nuclear facility. Why would they do that? Why would they want you even in that process? And two, you're going to have to give it fuel. So they're going to have to be dependent upon you to get fuel for their nuclear reactors once they become dependent on nuclear reactors. And you think that this is a good idea, this is a good plan, and then Iran is going to be like, thankfully, the U.S. is here to help us out. You're delusional. Every bit as delusional as the Russian deal. Let's go to Axios for a bit. Axios goes into this bit also. The nuclear deal proposed by the U.S. gives Iran on Saturday would allow limited low-level enrichment on Iranian soil for a to-be-determined time. Axios has learned, contradicting public statements by top officials. No, it does not. No, it doesn't. If Trump is saying Iran will not be, quote-unquote, allowed to enrich uranium, and from their point of view, okay, you'll get some running room because we need to get from point A to point B. But once we get from point A to point B, then we need you to stop doing that. Okay, then from the point Trump's administration's point of view, we stopped them from enriching uranium on their own soil, and we were able to create a gateway through this impasse. You haven't created anything because your premise is exactly the same. Whether they stop enriching immediately or whether they stop enriching a year from now, that's only a temporal difference. Doesn't matter. You're an untrustworthy actor. They had a deal with the JCPOA. All of that stuff was done. You pulled out that deal. So why on earth would Iran trust you with anything at all? You had a deal with Gaza, right? You had a deal with Canada and these other countries. You had a deal to end the war when you first got in office. None of those deals have come to pass. And the deals that you were trying to come up with the Russians are just absolutely absurd, comically stupid. This is also comically stupid. Iran is not for it, obviously. Supreme Leader Ayatollah comes out, makes a brutal statement saying effectively the U.S. can't do a damn thing on the nuclear issue. He gave a speech. He said the first word of the United States is that Iran should not have a nuclear industry and should rely on the United States. The leader said in the televised speech, this was on Wednesday, quote, our response to the U.S. nonsense is clear. They cannot do a damn thing in this matter. The leader, marking the 36th anniversary of the passing of the founder of the Islamic Republic. His remarks came after President Donald Trump outlined his administration's position when it comes to the nuclear negotiations with Iran, said Tehran would not be allowed nuclear enrichment. Ayatollah Khamenei said nuclear enrichment is the key to the nuclear issue, and the enemies have also put their fingers on enrichment. Again, notice the word enemies. Enemies. You are an enemy. Why will we trust you with something like our energy sovereignty? The answer is simple. We won't. We won't. He cited the 1980s experience of U.S. unreliability in providing fuel to Iran when the United States and Europeans denied 20% enrichment uranium to the Islamic Republic. Quote, why are you interfering? Whether Iran has enrichment or not, what does it matter to you? Who are you? The leader said, addressing the United States. This would have only been a better speech if to critique the supreme leader, if I may do so. If instead of saying, who are you, he would have said, who the fuck are you? To add emphasis. I wish he would have just said, who the fuck are you? That would have been fantastic. I would have been sitting here beaming. Whoa, that's awesome. You've pissed the supreme leader off to the degree that he is on TV dropping an F-bomb to put emphasis on who the F are you and why are you involved in this process? Why are you here? Why are you talking to us? Why are you even bringing up this issue with us? We're a sovereign country. We can do whatever we want. Who are you? Damning question. And apt. So this is dead on arrival. It's an impasse. Now, again, they're going to negotiations, and the catch becomes what happens in those negotiations. This is a red line. And this has been such a red line that I don't know how Iran, A, backs away from it, and B, what does the U.S. do if they do back away? And the fact that the U.S. is putting out demands that they knew in advance were off the table, again, makes me very dodgy about this process. A, you're lying as if the goal of all of this, is Iran trying to get a bomb. Okay, well, everybody knows that's a lie, or at the very least, everybody who's paying attention, it's a lie. On the second front, in addition to the lie, you're also making this very specific point that, well, this is not a process for the U.S. This will be a process for the IAEA, maybe countries in the region, maybe that. But you are blissfully ignoring Israel has nukes. You're not taking the position that we want to denuclearize the entire region. That is not the position you're taking. You're taking the position of, we need you to unilaterally make yourself defenseless. But you can trust us after you do so. Hey, what about Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Sudan? What about all these countries? Don't worry about those. You can trust us now. Trump talks like a fool. So does Witkoff. They talk like fools. Witkoff supposedly went into negotiations, gets a deal with Hamas. Israel changes the deal, and then Witkoff blames Hamas and does it over and over and over again. And again, if you look at the context of history, Iraq has nuclear weapons of mass destruction. Do they now? Do they now? Is there really yellow cake uranium that's part of this process? This is a rerun, meaning they don't even have the intelligence to come up with a new scheme. They come up with an oldie but baddie. Hey, let's just rerun the whole weapons of mass destruction plot. Let's just do that again. The public was stupid enough to believe this first time around. Maybe they'll be stupid enough to believe this time around also. And so they come up with Iran is trying to get new weapons of mass destruction, despite the fact that the country that you're given billions of dollars to a year, the country that has been invading one country after the next, that has been slaughtering, raping, killing, imprisoning women and children, burning children alive, using people as human shields, literally documented to do so, bombing hospitals. That country has nukes, and you're blissfully quiet. Why is the U.S. continuously acting as if it's a mediator? That's the part that's shocking to me, or the part I don't get. You are a participant of the war in Russia. Full stop. You're an enemy. You're belligerent. You're killing Russians. And yet you're saying, but this is not my war. It is. It's your war. It's your war. Full stop. It's your war. If you're going with this notion it's not your war, we have nothing else to talk about. It's your war. That's your proxy. You're giving it money. You're giving it directions. You're giving it intelligence. That's your war. The war only goes on because of you. And yet Trump is acting like I'm a mediator. The same thing here. Or with Israel and Gaza. You're given money, hand over fist, bombs, bullets, weapons. Every bomb that burned the child alive is a bomb that Donald Trump, or for that matter, Joe Biden, gave it. And yet you're acting like I'm also a mediator. How are you a mediator when you're a direct principal to the war? Same thing with Iran. You're acting as if you're some mediator. Mediator to what? To who? Why are you here? It's astonishing. And the US media runs with it like Donald Trump is a mediator. It's weird. If you are sitting on the moon looking at events, you would think to yourself that US media is functionally insane. They drop context, they don't give you necessary information, and they come away with this weird, warped point of view that takes what America wants more so into account than reality itself. Meaning, if roles were reversed, you would be able to see it from the other angle and come up with a solution that is more amenable to the other side. Otherwise, you just want a war. So that is what's going on that front in regards to Iran and Israel, in regards to the nuclear issue. The issue up to this point is deadlocked. It's going nowhere. Iran is not going to bend, nor should they. We shouldn't even be having this conversation. The entire premise of the conversation is ludicrous. Iran is a sovereign state. If it wants to build nukes, it can build nukes. It's not our issue, not our problem. That is a problem maybe for the region. Maybe that's a problem for Israel. I don't care. Fact of the matter is, if they had nukes, a lot of this wouldn't be taking place. If they would have just went and built those nukes early on, we probably wouldn't be here right now having this particular issue, because you wouldn't be able to attack Iran every bit as much as the issue with North Korea. I am more concerned with a religious maniac country, Israel, having nukes, frankly, and this potential willingness to use those nukes against Iran. That's my concern. I'm wondering, not picking a fight here, but I'm super curious about what certain analysts are going to say about this. Are they going to say, well, the U.S. is the U.S., Iran is Iran, and so if Donald Trump tells Iran that they need to get rid of their nuclear program, then that's what they should do? Is that what they're going to say? Are they going to pull another John Bolton? Are they going to say, well, Iran is making a mistake here because Donald Trump is going to nuke Iran? Is that what they're going to say? Is that what they're going to say? I strongly suspect that Iran is going to have to take its respect at the barrel of a gun every bit as much as Russia did, and that China may have to do something similar. This is not something that I like. It's not something that I want, but I live here. I'm an American. I see how my country behaves. It pushes and it pushes and it pushes, and it thinks it can bully, which is the reason why Russia is in a fight right now, shooting one Ukrainian in the face after the next, taking their respect at the barrel of a gun. And it seems that the only thing the U.S. is going to be happy with is either allowing, and I am saying allowing, Israel to strike Iran, acting as if, oh, we were in negotiations. I can't believe you did that. Or to join in with Israel for strikes on Iran. That is going to be a sad day. It's going to be a sad day. And if Iran starts blowing ships out the water, blowing planes out the sky, sad day. That's all I'm saying. It's something that you asked for. You were told the stove was hot, and yet you wanted to touch it anyway. And from Israel's point of view, they full well are in the belief set that if they attack Iran and Iran responds with overwhelming force, that the U.S. will get involved. We don't even know if Israel would, quote unquote, blackmail. Again, I'm of the mind that Israel was not a rogue actor, that they're working in U.S. interests, but blackmail with nukes. Hey, if they hit us, we're going to strike back with nukes. Okay, so you just put yourself in a position where you're going to use nukes, because the idea that you're going to be able to hit them and they not respond is nonsense. For however dangerous the situation in Ukraine and Russia is, this is just as bad, if not worse. Zelensky is a lunatic, yes. The Trump administration is full of sociopaths, yes. But you have a theocracy that is willing to murder its own people for its own political whims, meaning this Zionist whims of expansion into this kind of greater Israel. Iran is the last thing standing in that region. And not just the last thing standing in that region, U.S. policy is to get rid of Iran. So anything that takes place is never going to be in Iran's interest. It's going to always be either to weaken, undermine, destroy, or to put Iran in a position where Israel can go after it and the U.S. can go after it at a later date. There is no negotiation that is going to be to your best interest, in this case with the United States. You may want to do it to get rid of sanctions, fair enough. You may want to do it to start attacks, again, fair enough. But let's just be very clear. These negotiations are not for your benefit. These negotiations are to your detriment, which is the entire point of these negotiations. The bullying, threats, all of these things are trying to get something out of Iran that it doesn't necessarily want to give. Iran, to its credit, has stood strong, as they should and as they need to, because anything less than that would effectively allow you to be taken advantage of. And so sovereignty, for better or for worse, needs to be defended. And this is Iran's red line. Again, shouldn't have to negotiate with you at all. And so the fact that they're willing to go into this negotiation to stop a larger region of conflict, fair enough, I accept it, I get it, I understand where they're coming from. But let's be very clear. If Israel attacks, it's not doing so without the U.S. permission. And the U.S. can't say, well, we didn't sanction that attack. If once they attack and Iran responds with overwhelming force, which God knows I hope they do, take it off the map from my point of view. They are a rabid, fascist, apartheid state that has shown themselves to be incapable of being a state. So yeah, if you're going to hit Iran, then you need to deal with the consequences of that whirlwind. If the U.S. turns around and protects Israel, then the U.S. can't say we didn't sanction the attack. Full stop. You can't do that. How can you do that? Hey, we know Israel hit you, but we don't want you to hit them back. Dude, you've lost your mind. A sanction or issue of sovereignty is for us to be able to defend ourselves. The entire point of a nation is the defense of the people of that nation. If you strike, we need to ensure deterrence. And deterrence is obliterating you. But understand what that means. Israel will launch nukes. I'm trying to point out to you that this maniac state is the issue, not Iran. The fact that they're willing to provoke a fight and then potentially go to nukes in that fight is terrifying. And it should be terrifying. And the fact that the U.S. will back them up in that is even worse. For however bad things are in Europe, this is where nuclear conflict can happen. It's not provoked by the Iran. It's provoked by the U.S. and its proxies. Full stop. The issue is not Iran. The issue is America and its slavish devotion to this aircraft carrier in the Middle East that it effectively uses in order to grow and expand like any other settler colonial state for the best interests of the U.S. and for the lunatic whack jobs that are in that country. Be scared. Be very afraid. And I don't mean that in the sense of go cowering. And I don't mean it that way. I just mean if you are concerned about something popping off, this is the region of the world for that concern to take place. Yes. From my point of view, Russia is a rational actor. And they've done everything in their power to A, avoid war, and B, limit the scope and expansion of that war. But in the same way that the U.S. kept poking and poking and poking and poking and pushing and pushing and getting closer to the border, lying, removing credibility. Even you realize the reason that those airplanes were out there was because under a treaty, at least this is what Ratanzi is reporting, that they're supposed to be out there under satellite coverage. This was part of the deal. And so not only did you back them in doing this, you backed them in doing this on something that a treaty obligation required them to do. Now you could say, why would Russia trust the U.S. under these terms? Agreed. And would they trust them going forward? No, they would not. And I'm saying, Iran, buyer beware. And up to this point, it seemed to have taken somewhat of a rational line on this notion of, we have our standards. You're not going to bully us, not going to push us. We would accept a deal under these terms that we're okay with. Enrichment and removing enrichment is off the table. God bless them for it. God bless him for it. But let me bring in my guests. I see him in the background. I'll hit the Russia thing at the 8 o'clock hour, maybe the 9 o'clock hour. I screwed up on the calendar today. I thought Ted Rall was going to be here at 9. Ted Rall is going to be here tomorrow at 9 o'clock. My mistake. But let me bring in my guests. We're joined with Andrii Telizhenko. There we are. Andrii Telizhenko, he is a good friend of the show, a Ukrainian whistleblower, formerly diplomat. Andrii, welcome to the show, man. I haven't seen you in a while. How you doing? You doing all right?
Good morning, Jamal. Good to see you. Yeah, didn't see each other for some time, so good to be back.
I have a question for you. So, and let me write this down just so I remember. Oh, Jesus, dropped out of my mind. Arestovich. Okay. So, 2 things. Recently, a Ukrainian diplomat was murdered in Spain. And, well, he wasn't a diplomat, a political figure, I should say. And you have various elements of the government, various elements of the Ukrainian, let's say, architecture that thought it was a great thing and was calling for the murder of other people who were opposition figures against this basically Banderite government that's in Ukraine currently. They murdered the guy in the middle of a European country, and the European said Russia probably had something to do with it, which is astonishing, right? You have these neo-Nazis who are running a Ukrainian regime at this point, blown off elections, blown off opposition media, blown off opposition political figures, put opposition political figures in jail, murdered opposition political figures, and many had to flee the country, like yourself, in order to preserve their life. And when a European country sees somebody get murdered on the street, that's a political opposition figure in Ukraine, their first thought is, clearly the Russians had something to do with this. Give me your take on this, because you have many fascists in Ukraine that thinks this is great and that are advocating for more of these killings for people who are outside of the country. Arestovich being one. And I want to get to Arestovich in a moment, but give me your take just on that part first.
Look, first of all, I knew Andrei Portnov, the guy who got killed. We were friends for some time before. We didn't speak with each other for the last couple of years. I spoke to him last year, I believe, over the phone. But we were friends before this, and I can tell you that he was murdered, from what I understand, because he was collaborating with the West onto lifting his sanctions and working with U.S. intel groups on lifting his sanctions. So that's what the deal was about, from my information. And I spoke about this on RT right away after he got shot, an hour after he got shot. And
wait, real quick. I just want to nail that down. They murdered him because he was working on trying to remove sanctions?
He was working to remove his sanctions, and he was collaborating with the Western intelligence against Zelensky. He was ready to give compromise on Zelensky to the United States, and he was close to Zelensky the last couple of years. He was coordinating. He had his people in the government. He has people within the president's administration who he helped appoint. He had people in the cabinet ministers who he helped appoint. He basically, Andrei Portnov coordinated all the judicial sector in Ukraine, so within the Zelensky regime. So this is his role he knew what was happening in the insides. He knew all the coordinations, and he really wanted his sanctions off, because I knew him and I worked with him when he was trying to lift his Canadian sanctions off and other sanctions, and he met with different G7 ambassadors before, and he was ready. He provided other information against Poroshenko, against those kind of people before, years before. But today, Zelensky regime doesn't doesn't let you do that, because anyway, if you want to go against the Zelensky regime, you're gonna get shot and killed right in downtown any European state. So this is the reality. This is my take on this. This is from my understanding, knowing the situation a bit from the inside, what happened, and knowing Andrei Portnov personally. So unfortunately, that is the case. Again, it's not Russia. He was against Russia. He hated Russia. He actually criticized Russia, criticized me for going on RT, for going on Russian TV channels, talking, basically promoting peace with Russia. And that's our last conversation was over the phone. We actually had a bit of dispute about all that situation like a year ago, and that's what it was all about. Unfortunately, the guy had 5 kids. One of them, the last child, was born last year. That's what I congratulated and called him on that issue, and so that's a tragedy for the family, and
Yeah.
God rest his soul. But overall, that is the reality that he was not pro-Russian. He was very pro-Western, like wanted to be pro-Western, and worked with Western intel groups and intelligence to lift the sanctions and do whatever can to get the sanctions off, so he can, because he had some finances that he wanted to go back and forth, and he wanted that to not to restrain him.
So just so I'm clear, the sanctions were on him. And the
Yes.
sanctions were coming from what? The United States, or the sanctions were coming from Ukraine?
United States. United States.
So the sanctions were preventing him from going back to Ukraine.
No, the sanctions are preventing him from easily transferring money in between his businesses. The guy is a multimillionaire. Like for him, it was a big deal. It's not just like for a person like me who needs to get a job and etc. The guy had money, he just couldn't transfer that too much. He had too much problems going around and paying too much taxes or in the side tips to get those money transferred. So he needed those sanctions off, the U.S. sanctions, and that is the case. He was working to get them lifted, and he was ready to sell out Zelensky. That's why he got shot.
So when you say sell out Zelensky, what does that mean? I mean,
give a compromise against him. Give a compromise against Zelensky to the U.S. authorities.
But the U.S. doesn't know these stories. I mean, and the reason why I'm asking this, U.S. intel has been in Ukraine for decades.
There's different groups within the United States intel, right? It's not just the whole intel, but there's also, I've been talking before with some FBI agents years ago who were actually were workable with. They understood the situation. They were not let to do their job by their superiors who are politicized by the Biden and Obama regime. So there are people who want to do their job. The same thing with Portnov and other people. And there was information that from Ukraine, the people wanted to give out information to Washington on the Zelensky and how the money laundered the U.S. taxpayers' dollars, where the arm deals went, everything, all that kind of stuff that was interesting to the United States. And Andrii Portnov was the guy who knew a lot, and he had all that compromised information on his side that he wanted to use. And somebody found out, somebody leaked it, somebody like got it out there, and that's what I believe. I don't know if it's true. Maybe I'm wrong in the situation. Maybe there's something more to it. Like as I said, I only spoke to him last year, but this is the reality that was happening from what I understood.
When you spoke to him last year, did this come up? Like clearly not about him being threatened, but about him working with Western intel and that he was going to give this information to Zelensky. Because like
I knew that he was working with Western intel because I connected him once before I got sanctioned, before I was still working to the other side with that intel and with those people. So I know that he was working with them because I was the one who actually introduced him to some of the people he was working with. And plus he was working with other people, which I also knew from different sources.
Now wow. So what did he have? Files? Documentation?
On Zelensky, Yermak, all that crowd, they're misusing their government and misusing U.S. taxpayers' money, weapons, etc., etc., etc. So,
and he was going to hand it all over. Was the Trump administration willing to use that information?
From what I understand, yes. There was interest in the RICO case in the United States. We spoke about this some time ago on your show, a couple of shows back. There was interest in opening a RICO case against the Zelensky regime involving misuse of U.S. taxpayers' dollars after Trump became president. So that was the interest, and I think one of those people was like Portnov. I think there's more, and there's not just Portnov, but Portnov was the guy who was very close to Zelensky, and that's why he took the hit from the Zelensky regime and get shot.
That is fascinating. Oh, that is fascinating. Wow. Because that's not the way they're talking about it. They're talking about it meaning what you just said is crucial information as to why he would be murdered. what Europe is saying when they're saying anything at all is, well, we think that this guy, because he was working with the Russians, that he got whacked,
He was
which
never
puts
working
a
with the Russians.
weird
Like
spin on it.
he was working with the Russians years ago. Years. I was also working with the Obama people years
Yeah,
ago, but I'm not there like or with the Democrats or with the neocons, whatever. Like before 2004, 15, it doesn't make me with their guy.
exactly.
I was then I changed my view dramatically and went on the other side. The same thing with Portnoy. He
But
actually
that's my
changed
point.
his view, and he worked with Zelensky, and everybody knew that he worked with Zelensky. Everybody who knew Portnoy and anybody who worked in the government sector or intel within Europe knows that this guy was working with Zelensky very closely. He was meeting with him
Wow.
closely, and he was coordinating all the judicial sector in Ukraine. So they knew what he was doing and what he was about. It's not like just came out of the sky. This guy was actually a prominent figure in the Ukrainian political sphere. And he was not an official position, but he coordinated everything in the background. He was like a puppeteer within the court system and judicial system and different other sides in the law enforcement sector in Ukraine. So like
Yeah,
this guy was prominent. It's not like just some regular figure who was running around and
it's
bragging about
unfortunate
stuff.
because they just trashed his. It puts you in the mind of like in the United States, sometimes you have a situation where, let's say, a kid get killed by the cops, like the kid gets murdered, and they would say, "Yeah, the cops killed him, but he smoked marijuana." And it's like, okay, well, what does the marijuana have to do with the fact that you murdered the guy? It's like it's a way of damaging the person's reputation and try to make them look bad, as if it was justifiable what happened to him. That's the way they treated him in the media. They were like, well, he's a shady business guy. He's this and that. Missing the basic fact of what you just said. This guy was an opposition political figure in Ukraine, and the Ukrainian government had him murdered. And in many respects, as you point out, had him murdered because he had information on Zelensky that they effectively needed to silence him before the information got out. So they would go so far as to take a brazen act of terrorism on European soil. And the European response to this is to pretend as if this is not a big deal, or that he somehow had it coming. It's just amazing. It's just,
That's why if it was the other way around, it would have been a bigger deal in the European press, or
yeah,
the outcome of the investigation would have been known that this is the where it all came from. Because it's not being known today, it gives me understanding that it was the Valverde of Kiev in this situation where everything is quiet now. So like we were friends before. We had our disputes. We didn't talk for a couple of years. We had different political opinions on the situation. He actually hated Russia the last years.
yeah,
He had his family house blown up by the Russian military or something happened. I don't know, something personal happened. And he was working closely with Zelensky. That's what I know, and that's it. So the problem is, the reality is, if they would say the truth in the press, at least, I would have believed maybe I would be wrong. But even
yeah,
they're saying the opposite thing of what I'm saying, knowing some of the situations on the inside, I didn't know everything, but right, as I spoke a year ago to him. But at least I would have known that I was wrong if they would tell the truth. But here now, they're not saying the truth. They're saying the opposite of what the truth is. And actually reached out to a couple of Western media, like the big media agencies, and spoke to them off record. And they said, we are working on the story in a different way. So that's what I got in my answer. So I understood that
wow,
I
that
was
is
ready to tell
amazing.
them the truth.
That is amazing. I'm not, by the way, not shocked at all. We're looking at the story in a different light. Yeah, I bet you
Yeah.
are. I bet you are. Oh man, that is amazing. Because I was going to ask you if any of the media organizations reached out to you, but as you pointed out, you reached out to them, and they're like, "Yeah, we're not
Like
interested."
we shoot back and forth. They reached out to them, then they called me back, and they said, they basically I gave them some of the insights what I told you here, and I said, oh, we're gonna call you back. They called me back. Said, we're looking at this on different light. Our people on the ground are different. There's different people working on this. We're not gonna meet.
Wow, just amazing, just amazing. I'm curious on something else. Arestovich once made this statement, this speech, where he pointed out, he said, well, in order for us to get NATO membership, we are going to have to go through the Russians to do it. Meaning he knew in advance that this was going to lead to war. He accepted it was going to lead to war and was okay with it leading to war in this kind of test of strength in order to be part of NATO. When you were working with the Ukrainian government, did they know that? Like, was that something that was widely understood, or was that something that was only understood by a few people who were in those in the government?
No, it was understood. That's why I came out of the government. I didn't want my country to be getting into this chaos of bloodshed. And that's why I came out against the Biden crime family, because they were using Ukraine for their crimes, and I knew they're going to use Ukraine for something bigger. This will lead them off the hook. They're going to use Ukraine for something bigger. That's why I came out with the facts against Biden, because I knew that he was going to lure Ukraine into this shitstorm. Sorry for my language, but that's
Oh, you're fine. It's a shitstorm. Yeah.
And everybody since after the coup knew that this is going to be a war. I actually were talking with different G7 ambassadors and embassy officials since 2014-15 to send in sleeper agents, because we were coordinating law enforcement, and I was working within the prosecutor's office. Plus, I was working with the foreigners a lot, talking off record to them, doing different meetings. So there were talks about in 2014-15 with this Five Eyes group of the 5 intel agencies from around the globe to use Ukraine to send sleeper agents within Russia for them to then do terrorist attacks and to get more agents from within Russian territory to use against Russia itself. So this was talking 2014-15, right? Like long before this big war or this conflict with Russia started. So they were preparing for this war. And I was like, I said, there were different factors when I found out about what was happening in my country, but I didn't want my country going that far.
Yeah.
The only way out was for me to get out and start speaking the truth from the other side, which I did. Gradually, I went from smaller steps, being afraid, then saying, I should speak out more and more. And that today, where I am, I'm speaking with my lungs open, freely what I want. But it all started from small steps, being afraid for my life, because I knew that they're going to go after me if I do go right away. So this was all being pre-planned. Arestovich knew about this also, like being after the government. But under even Poroshenko, this was all being coordinated and pre-planned. They wanted this war. They believed that Ukraine could have won this war. The West told that the Russian army has no military, that their nuclear missiles are not capable. They were feeding this information to the Ukrainian government and lying to us all the time, and basically getting all these ideas of use sleeper agents from Ukraine, because Ukrainians, even with Belarusians, are Russian. It's much closer to the Russian language. So basically, we have no accent with the Russians.
Right.
We were one country, right, for more than 350 years. Together, and before that, we were also one country because we started from one source, from Kiev, and then all spread to the side of the country. So they were using Ukraine long before the war and conflict started to get this basically escalation and to get what we see today. So this is Aristoteles' words are true. He knew about it also. Problem is, why didn't he do anything sooner than that? He started going into opposition after they understood that they could not destroy Russia from within. Basically, after 3 months, that was the time frame for them to understand if Russia will shake apart, the people will rise and take over the government and take over Putin and basically have a revolution there and dismantle it into 50 pieces or 3 pieces, whatever, to take over its resources. It didn't happen, so then Aristotle basically understood and he fled, understanding that they lost and he needs to do something to save himself. So that's why he's acting opposition today, even though
it's actually he realized he screwed up and that it didn't turn out the way that he was told it was going to turn out. And so he bailed. He got out of Dodge.
Yes. If he had sold, he would have bailed sooner, but he didn't. Or some conscience.
This is a catastrophe. And I feel like the fact that my government pushes this, I feel horrible about that. Give me your read on Zelensky for a moment. Let me give you my read first, and I want to give me your take on it. I get the sense that when Zelensky, well, 2 things. First, when Zelensky first got elected, and he got elected on a peace ticket, this is part of the reason I find this to be such a catastrophe. The majority of the country wanted peaceful existence. They didn't want a war. That's why they elected him. Do you think when he first got elected, he was being straight, that that's what he wanted? Or do you think he was an actor from the very beginning?
He, I knew, as I said, we spoke about this, and I knew him before he
Yeah.
became president. Actually, Portnoy was the one who actually convinced me to support Zelensky at one point in 2019, that he will be a game changer. He'll bring peace. He'll go to Donbass and speak to the people of Donbass 2 weeks after he gets elected. That they will try to unite Ukraine back together. He'll implement the Minsk Accords. Blah blah blah.
Yeah.
So that was the deal, even from the inside. People like Portnoy and other people who I worked with, they knew Zelensky, and basically that's what the deal was about. That's how I actually got sold on him, because I didn't believe that an actor can be president. I was like, what the hell is this? This is like, I cannot, a person who works in politics and government, I cannot support a guy who was an actor. Like, for me, it was until March of 2019, I did not support him. And I
Yeah.
had my big doubts about him. And then Andrii Portnoy, we spoke, and he said, "Oh, you should support this guy. He's our guy. He's going to bring peace." Blah blah blah. So I went into on that, and actually Zelensky did want peace. And then in July, I believe so, 2019, he went to London, and then he switched sides. Prince Chip took him to London because Kolomoisky, the owner of Zelensky at that time, had financial problems and sanction problems with the United States, and criminal case against him within the FBI. So the other oligarch, the Soros right-hand man, Prince Chip, took Zelensky to London and basically introduced him to MI6. And that's when Zelensky sold out, and then that's when Ukraine was preparing for full-scale war. Because
So just
Poroshenko,
no, please. I'm sorry. Please.
because Poroshenko at one time, he backed out. He was afraid to go to war with Russia, so that's why he got changed, and and that's why the elites want to change the government for a person like Zelensky, who maybe go the other track, but then Zelensky cleaned house and went against his owners like Kolomoisky and other oligarchs, and went under the Brits in the West and South to fight this war, to have more power than the oligarchs who control him. So that's what his character is. That's who he is. He doesn't care about people, doesn't care about anything else. He just cares about himself, and that's why he did it. He didn't do it for Ukraine to be free and join NATO or whatever what he's talking about in public. He did it to make money. The West promised him, the Brits and the CIA promised him that he will be a billionaire, that he will make much, much, much more money than even the Russians can pay him. So this is the reality. You're gonna be hero number one. You're gonna be God in democracy. That's what we're gonna do for you, and we're gonna protect you until the end. So and that's when he basically became a British citizen. His wife is a British citizen. Yermak is a British citizen, and his whole security detail is being coordinated by the British intelligence. Like, his detail is Ukrainians, but they're coordinated by the British intelligence. Their security, his protection, and his family is also. So this is the reality. That's when he switched, and that's when Ukraine was going on to full-scale war mode and not backing out.
Just so I'm clear, I want to make sure I heard this right. So when he first ran, he really did want peace, and he's changed.
Yes, he actually promised people who were supporting him and financing him and coordinating him that he will bring peace to Ukraine. Not only to the people, public, like on TV,
even
but
behind
also
the scenes, he was making
behind
that
the
promise.
scenes. Yes, because there were already deals made that he's going to go to Donetsk 2 weeks after he gets elected and speak to the people in Donbass, that they are trying to unite Ukraine back. That's what the idea was, for him to do such kind of projects, but then he backed out. The Americans were trying to find a way to get to him. I know that's also from fact, because I was in contact. I had people even from the Obama administration who thought publicly were destroying my name on CNN, etc., calling me saying, "How do we get to Zelensky? We need contact with him," because they didn't have direct reach out to him. And so that's basically, they found him the way to him, and he was brought to the British intelligence, and he sold out to the British intelligence to fight this war. That's the only way his only agenda was to start and get Russia involved in this conflict, and that's it. Russia had no other choice to get involved because the national security interests were on the brink of line, because then things would have got much, much worse if Ukraine had any other missiles involved or anything else on their soil from outside, not their own, from outside of Ukraine, being brought on Ukrainian soil. So basically, that was a danger for the Russian Federation. Any
Andrii, that is
nuclear
deeply
launch
frustrating to
missiles
hear.
from Ukraine to Russia 3 minutes away, that's not the time frame for Moscow to be handling. It's the same with the Cuban Missile Crisis. But everybody in the Cuban Missile Crisis understood that there's national security threats on both sides, and that's why there were two minds prevailed. Kennedy backed out of Turkey with the Saturn program, and then the Soviets backed out of Cuba. So this was all worked out. Here we have a total disaster of political figures running the world. I'm talking about Europeans and Ukraine and all the other globalists. Like I still have hope for Trump, and I still hope
Andrii,
that he has things on the table, and I hope for Putin also.
this is deeply frustrating. Because what that means is, even if a person gets elected on a peace ticket, it doesn't mean that they're going to go through with it. Meaning, even if they're true believers, that they can be got. Putin said one day, he says, it doesn't really matter what the American president wants. He said, regardless of what they say, a man is going to come in with a black suit, open a suitcase, and explain, this is how the world works, and this is what we need you to do. And that sounds very similar to what you're telling me about Zelensky. Regardless of what he wanted politically in the very beginning, when he took on this role of, okay, I'm going to be a peace candidate, he was flipped based on his own wants. And in those money, maybe your life, maybe, whatever they use in order to flip him, that he flipped, that he initially was a true believer. And somewhere along the way, he became this figure that we see now. I want to get to something else with Zelensky. Give me a read on this. Do you think that part of the reason he is so, they described him in Western media as messianic, that it's almost like a religious thing for him, like he's in religious reverie, playing this role of, I'm always in these fatigues, I'm always in this war mode, that type of person that he's playing on TV. Do you think part of that is because he feels that he was lied to, that they told him, you're going to beat the Russians, we're going to go after them economically, you're going to go after them militarily, you're going to get all of this money, you're going to be safe, Ukraine is going to win, you're going to join NATO, blah, 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 blah. Meaning they told him all of this stuff. And 600,000 dead Ukrainians later, a country that has been just ripped up, where they're losing 20, 30% of their territory, he, on some level, he feels like he's been led down a path, that he's effectively been lied to, which is part of the reason why he's been so adamant, give me money, give me weapons. Europe must give me billions of dollars. The United States can't just leave me in this situation. Because for all intents and purposes, they promise him things that they're not now delivering.
Yeah, first of all, he's a bully for himself. He's basically a very characteristic, like the one who plays the show is a comedian, a nice guy. It's all a lie. Personally, he is very aggressive and bully style, like street
It
style
shows.
guy.
Yeah, it shows.
Like I met him after he got elected. We had lunch, and he was actually very, I'm the president, I'm this, and I'm the powerful guy. Like he was actually very tough, even though small guy, former drug addict at that time that he came back to the drugs. So like that kind of stuff, you can see from him very trying to be more confident than he is. That's one thing, and you're right on this. And I know because we were also told the same thing that he was being told that you were telling here right now, for example, that you're going to win the Russians. The Russians are nothing. Ukraine can beat them. We were told the same thing in the government. We had former deputy head of Pentagon come to Ukraine in 2014, and U.S. senators and other officials and CIA officials come to Ukraine and say, you're going to beat the Russians. They're not going to do anything. You have to go forward. You have to. They were giving us classified information about Putin, which was not making any sense at all, and which was the opposite of what was the reality on Putin. Because actually, I started watching Putin's interviews and how he acts, what his constant political position was from 1991. He actually didn't change his political position at all. He was constant. Like it shows something within a person what he actually is compared to Zelensky, Ukraine, Poroshenko, always changing their mind. They don't know what they're doing because they do not know what they're doing. Zelensky got lured into it much easier because he didn't understand politics at all. He didn't understand the reality at all. He said that this is just going to be a walk in the park, and he's going to become a billionaire. He's going to trash Russia, even though he made millions of dollars in Russia before, and he didn't care about that. And so
You're saying he was easily manipulated. That's your point.
Yeah, because he didn't understand politics. We understood politics a bit, and even then we were manipulated because it was brought us to us not just by some like Mr. John from America who came in. I'm going to bring you a file on Putin or Russia or whatever. No, it was brought on by U.S. government officials, high-ranking U.S. government officials, classified information on Russia, which was a lie. And we actually also were buying into it. And then at the same time, we were understanding that something's wrong here, and we didn't move in full scale as they were telling us to do. So this is the reality. The West lies. The West used Ukraine. The problem is Ukraine wanted to be used at the same time. Ukraine elites wanted to sell out to the West at the same time. I said, I was there. They were trying to sell out to Americans, getting U.S. passports, et cetera, et cetera. Like the head of the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, Umerov, the guy who was running the so-called peace talks in Istanbul, he is a U.S. citizen. His wife lives in Miami in a $1 million villa. There you go. Like there's just a lot of other people who are foreign citizens and different. Like we have British citizens, we have French citizens, German citizens, U.S. citizens, everything. The president of Ukraine is a British citizen. He has a British passport. His father and mother lives in Israel. They got Israeli passport. So this is like we have a whole. Nobody's Ukrainian. Only the people who are Ukrainians are getting killed right now, being thrown like dogs to the front lines because they're poor. They have the possibility to fight for themselves, and they are under propaganda believing that they can win Russia. But everybody else, the elites, there's nobody else to trust them. They sold out not just to America or to the British. They sold out to the globalists, the neocons, the people who don't even represent those countries, the British and Americans. They represent themselves only, but they're under government support. That's why they have so much power. So this is the reality.
Andrii, this has been a fantastic interview. No, honestly. There are about 720 people here watching this interview. It is amazing to me because, when Zelensky is like, give me weapons, give me weapons, give me weapons. You must give me this. You must give me money. You must give me this. And you think to yourself, if they promised him certain things, that would explain why he acts this way. Like his behavior makes sense in the context of believing what he has been told. People in suits saying, you're going to be able to do this. You're going to be a billionaire. You're going to take over, you're going to be at NATO. You're going to be part of the EU. You're going to beat the Russians. And they're promising him all of these things. And he's thinking, I'm talking to people in power. They know they can ensure that these things happen. And then it all falls apart.
To liars who don't care about anybody.
But he doesn't know that. And it all falls apart. And he's stuck with a broken country with hundreds of thousands of lives on his conscience.
But if he wanted to get out, he could have risked his life for something. But he could have.
But Andrii, there's the rub.
I know. But I spoke to his people 2 years ago before the China peace plan, etc. And I told them, this clown can be a blood clown, or he can be at least a clown that saved the country, didn't let it to more bloodshed. Really? Get out of this. Go on the Chinese plan. Agree on it. It's not Russian. It's Chinese. Agree upon this. Have the Chinese help you work this way out with the Russians, with the West, and move forward. Save the country. I got this to people who were close to Zelensky. They actually wanted to meet with me outside of Ukraine, where I'm at. We made a disclosed location, etc. But they didn't go for it. They didn't. He has so much other people who can tell him that also, and he understands that he's done. He could have just come out and say, "We're going to sign this peace deal with the Russians," and that's it.
But
he could have saved millions of people. Everybody's worried. I'm worried about my life too. But I'm coming out and saying things and trying to do things. I'm worried about my life. But I'm trying to do things for my country because I believe that maybe my even small interview here and there can get somebody to understand what is happening and save somebody's life. He can do it physically. He can just sign the agreements, peace deals, and get out of Ukraine, get a deal, go somewhere maybe to China, and shut up, and that's it. Just save the country and leave. No, he's
Yeah.
there. He's still sticking to his seat. He got lied to. He understands that he got lied to, but he's still sticking to his seat, believing that they're still lying to him that they can topple Russia. That is the problem here.
So you think he really believes that he still can win this?
Yeah. He does. That's why he actually, at one point, he stopped believing it. It was right after Trump became president, and then the Europeans lured in very aggressively onto him and onto Trump, saying he needs to continue this war. And Zelensky actually believed in their eyes that they can win again. They need to topple Russia. They need to Russia respond aggressively. That's why they're making all these provocations and Russian soil, terrorist attacks, so they can have Russia respond aggressively, even though Russia can, because actually the nuclear arsenal nuclear potential was hit, and basically their national security, they can respond as easily as possible. The United States would have responded with the hellfire on any country would have done that, and they say it's the name of democracy. So Russia has the same possibility, but it doesn't, because President Putin actually has a cool head and understands that he wants peace, not war. If he wanted war, he could have destroyed Ukraine really fast and come in and that'd be it. No, but he wants to end this peacefully. But Zelensky still wants to push Russia and show a picture and get more money. That's why he's still doing it. So I'm not giving him a way out. Don't believe in that he's some young boy that he got fooled. He got fooled, but he believes in those lies. He wants to believe in those lies, because any other way around, he would have left and saved this and said, "The hell with you. I'll make a deal with Russia, China, anywhere else, India, for example, and leave."
No,
there's other chances he could do, but he doesn't.
Yeah.
So
you have my full agreement.
Don't get him off the hook easily. He's
he gets no pass on this. Dude, it's like you've gotten hundreds of thousands of people killed. You had a philosophical responsibility to your country that you've failed at. I mean, you've been sending people on these death missions for propaganda purposes. Like, it's disgusting. So no, I'm not trying to give him a pass. I'm trying to understand what's in his mind and like why his behavior seems so strange to me. And I'm trying to understand.
He's a drug addict at the same time. You can understand, you cannot understand a drug addict's mind directly. If it was a regular, normal person, it would be one thing. But then you have people like who are in cocaine a lot and for years and years. You cannot understand what they want.
One last thing before I let you go. Klitschko and Zelensky. The Klitschko thing is very weird to me. So Klitschko was one of these people that Victoria Nuland, when she was on the phone with Jeffrey Pyatt, and she was like, F the EU, we're going to put people in these positions and everything else. Klitschko was one of those people. What's weird about it is that they overthrew the government of Ukraine. And so when Klitschko is like, this is not democracy, it wasn't democracy since they overthrew the government of Ukraine. It's just very weird that that's the angle that he's taken. But he has been very angry at Zelensky because Zelensky has been effectively destroying any notion of political opposition, even among the Banderites. What is going on with that? And this could be the last question.
Yeah, money. Money flow. That's what, it goes as simple as that. There's no, they covered up with their political so-called opposition. Money flow. That is it. Kiev is a big money gamer in the situation. Klitschko controls all the prostitution, drug situation in the city. So he has a lot of control. And also the building and projects within the city that Zelensky's people want to come in.
Yeah.
They have to give payouts to Klitschko or to his people. There's a lot of criminal cases against each other. So that's why Zelensky doesn't want it. Plus, he's a prominent figure that can get the West's attention and has the West's attention to, if Zelensky go down, they can put in Klitschko because he is a German citizen. He has a lot of support from the Europeans. Yeah, Zelensky is a British, but UK is not in the EU, and plus UK is not with the US that much. It's in the middle, so they have their own problems political. Klitschko was one time thought of as a president in 2012. I knew people who lobbied him in Washington. I was with Klitschko's team for some time during that when they were close with Timoshenko, and even during the coup, people thought that Klitschko would be the next president. And then at the end of the coup, it all switched really fast. Poroshenko became the figure that was going to go run for president, and Klitschko backed out. So at the same time, it's not just their decisions. You have to understand, it's all decisions from outside. Nuland, the Germans, the British, the Americans, they're all waging in on who's going to become the who in Ukraine. And with Zelensky, that's what they basically didn't believe that he could have won, and he did win because the people wanted peace, and that they bought him off after. All these other guys are bought in before, so they're all going and advising with their puppeteers outside of Ukraine. And the same thing here with Zelensky and Klitschko, just a money flow problem. Klitschko has a lot of support in Europe, and that's why Zelensky is afraid of him as an opponent that could come in and basically switch sides and destroy him at one point. The West will say, "We want Klitschko. It's easier for him to switch. He's the mayor. He's there. He's our guy also." Zelensky goes away, we're going to destroy him. So that's why Zelensky wants to destroy him before the West puts him into power.
I see. Andrii, this was a great interview. I've been illuminated, honestly. Like, I've learned a lot in this interview. Thank you for this, man. You be safe. Andrii Telizhenko, he's a Ukrainian whistleblower, former diplomat. Be safe, man. You have a good one, okay?
Thank you. God bless them all. It was always a great pleasure talking to all the viewers and listeners. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wow, that was a good interview. That was a very good interview. I want to bring on my next guest. I think this is the first time he's been on the show, even though I've noticed him on Twitter and I've seen some of his other articles. Cal Anzalone, I want to get that name right. Is that correct? Anzalone?
Anzalone.
Anzalone, thank you. Cal Anzalone, he is opinion editor for antiwar.com, a news editor for Libertarian Institute. He hosts the Cal Anzalone Show. Is co-host of Conflicts of Interest with Connor Freeman. Thank you for joining me, man, especially on short notice. You doing okay today?
Yeah, doing pretty well. I think I caught a little summer cold from the baby, so if I sound a little congested today, that's why. But happy to be here and talking to you this morning.
No, you're perfectly fine. The baby, how old is the child?
She'll be 9 months next week.
Oh, so you're a new dad.
Yep, first time.
New dad. Congratulations, belated.
Thank you very much.
I know it's a lot of work. So there's that. So the reason I reached out to you, I've had Sarah Bill. Sarah Bill's on DDGO Politics, and she's talked about like Peter Thiel and some of the things that he's effectively wanted to accomplish. And he is this Darth Vader-esque type figure as an oligarch of sorts. One of the main companies, Palantir, I think is the way it's pronounced. There are two stories that coincide with this. I want to hit the Palantir story first. This is a story you wrote for Libertarian Times, and just so the audience can see it. And when I cut this video, I will put it at the bottom of the video so they can read it. White House taps Palantir for government-wide database surveilling Americans. And you point out in the article right here, according to the New York Times report published on February, a key Palantir product known as Foundry has been used by at least 4 U.S. federal agencies, including the Department of Homeland Security, Health and Human Services. The firm is now speaking with other cabinet-level agencies. Now, this is an organizational company that backed Donald Trump. You can even see signs at Trump's rallies with Palantir in the background. And he effectively seems to be, I would use the term, feeding Americans to Palantir. So not just 3 agencies, but multiple federal agencies under this kind of like mass database of Americans where you can have this overarching and overwhelming surveillance of them having access to multiple sources of data and information. And people have even made the argument that Doge, part of its either a point or after effect, was to provide that information, for that streams of information to be given to these companies in this way. Give me your take on this. I mean, as you point out in the article, this is effectively government-wide surveillance of multiple federal agencies where it can collate information among disparate things. Social Security, Health and Human Services, Department of Education, pick any random thing, and all of that stuff can get collated for certain outcomes or surveillance. Give me your take on this. First, did I explain that right? And 2, step into the story for me.
Right. Yeah. And I guess, add just a few more details here. So what's going on and what we've known so far is that 4 government agencies have contracted with Palantir to use this Foundry system that they have to basically categorize and share all the information between those agencies. But next up, the Department of Health and Human Services, the Social Security Administration, the IRS are trying to also buy into that. And the Pentagon is as well. They're about to sign an $800 million contract with Palantir. So just in the first 4 months of the Trump administration, looks like that agency has, at least what we publicly know, racked up about $1 billion in contracts from the U.S. government. Now, they also have this program called Gotham. And Gotham runs in Foundry. So if Foundry is the database, Gotham's a program that could search through and help agents find information on people very quickly. And I think initially some people might say, oh, this made sense. Why wouldn't the U.S. government, you know, if they had this information, be able to search and find it very quickly? But, you know, start to think about this really quick. You know, for a lot of welfare programs in the United States that are means tested, you have to give your bank account information, all of your asset information to the Social Security Administration, the Department of Health and Human Services, right? Well, now the IRS, the FBI, all these other agencies are going to have access to that, the immigration enforcement. And my guess is that's really who gets targeted with this first. People who are in the country illegally, who have given their information to one government agency, either to get access to welfare, to register for jobs, to even pay taxes to the IRS. Right, then ICE and all these other agencies are going to have access to this. But also, I think this creates a real problem for even Americans who are unquestionably, like myself, who are unquestionably American, when we start to see the government, especially once the intelligence services start to have access to this information, and they're sharing, you know, what the CIA learns from their overseas intercepts with the FBI to conduct domestic investigations, right? It's supposed to require a warrant for a federal police information to get access to your information. But if they could just go on Foundry and get access to all of your IRS documents, then that's a lot of information about you that they may try to prove that you committed a crime, whether you did or didn't. And so this information, I think, is worse than that, by the way, to be shared. Please continue. So this information isn't intended to be shared. So I think this is a massive violation of the Fourth Amendment.
I think of FISA for a moment, and I guess there are 2 points. Think of FISA in the way that they would have this, what is it called, reconstruction. So they would get information through a warrantless search, and then they would allow a federal agency to reconstruct in order to go after you for a particular crime, even though they didn't have any information about the crime in the very beginning of it. It was the FISA information that they were effectively using to reconstruct this case against you that they wouldn't have had otherwise if they didn't do this kind of illegal search. And as a software engineer, oh God, if you give me information, I can find all sorts of stuff. Like, meaning you're going to be able to write programs against Foundry and Gotham. I mean, think of writing a program to correlate information to go after political dissidents. Think of correlating information where these are certain people we don't particularly like. The Trump administration, for example, saying we're going to go after people who are critical of Israel. Okay, well, what does it look like when you have access to Social Security, Medicare, Health and Human Services, the IRS, when you combine all of this information together in these agencies and a government that is motivated to go after various groups? And by the way, not just people who are critical of the issue of Israel. What about if you have a Democratic administration going after right-wingers? I mean, think about the way they were debanking people, for example, where they were like, we're going to cut you off from your bank account. Think of in Europe, where those journalists, they didn't like their point of view, so they kicked them out of Europe and cut off their access to their bank accounts. That is terrifying. That is terrifying. And, you know, this is just the software part of it. I mean, this is the database part of it, where they're collating all of this information. We haven't even gotten to the AI version of it. So the other part of this that I want to piggyback on the story is the big, beautiful bill, as Donald Trump calls it, that's going to put $20 trillion on the debt. In the big, beautiful bill, there's a provision, let me flip this over so people can see it, that allows the federal government, right here, subsection C states that no state or political subdivision may enforce any law or regulation regulating artificial intelligence models, artificial intelligence systems, or automated decision systems during a 10-year period on the beginning date of the enactment of this act. So a big, beautiful bill that is supposed to be this kind of financial thing also has provision that allows the federal government to prevent any state from preventing or regulating artificial intelligence in its own borders, which is a power grab by the federal government in regards to using AI for mass surveillance. I think these two stories run in tandem. A, we're giving Palantir all of this data for it to be able to utilize. And B, the big, beautiful bill is going to allow the federal government massive powers in regards to using AI to mine that information for that surveillance. Give me a take on this. Am I being too draconian? I mean, for God's sake, they call the program Gotham.
Right.
Like, we're talking about Batman stuff, right? Where Batman goes through all of the systems in order to find people. That's the program we're talking about, where Alfred was like, this is too much power for a person to have. And Batman destroyed the program after the fact because the program was effectively invading everybody's privacy. They named it Gotham.
Right. Yeah. It's I'm very concerned about this. I think the next step is using AI predictive models and effectively developing a Minority Report dystopia in the United States for people who have seen that movie. You know, it's about predicting pre-crime, right? People get arrested because these machine humans in the movie. But in this case, it's just going to be this Foundry program where they have all this data. They're going to access it and they're going to say, oh, we see this, and this, and that means we think you're going to commit a crime. And another piece to all of this, particularly the U.S. intelligence agencies have been buying up Americans' data that's available through Meta, Google, other. I don't know what policies each of these organizations have on selling information,
social media. Yeah.
But they do buy that when they have the opportunity to. And so, again, you would assume that would be a violation of the Fourth Amendment, right? If they can't show up to Facebook and without a warrant and just demand your information, they can't then go with a check and effectively bribe Facebook to circumvent the law. But that's how it's worked at this point. And so, again, if they pile all this into a database and then they start trying to run predictive models off of it, I think we could be getting into pre-crime very soon. And I think it's worth mentioning here, too, that I don't know exactly to what extent this has taken place, but Palantir has worked with the IDF and the Israeli government on putting together databases.
Yes,
we have reporting that says that Israel used Lavender, this AI tool, to basically give all the Palestinians in Gaza a social credit score, a Hamas credit score. And even the soldiers who operate it, Lavender, will say, like, we are able to adjust different things in the settings for Lavender to generate 20,000 new names on the list and just add all these new targets. And in Gaza, being on that list marked not just you, but your entire family for death, because Israel would actually wait until you were home with your family to blow up entire families at a time. And both Alex Karp, who is, I believe, the main guy at Palantir now, and co-founder of Palantir, Peter Thiel, have both been confronted over this and basically just shrugged and laughed it off. The official Palantir position goes something like this: we just make databases, we just make AI tools, and what the government does with it, they do with it. That our role isn't to judge what people are doing with the information and the tools that we, and this would obviously be stupid if Lockheed Martin was saying it, right? If they were saying that, we gave these fighter jets to Israel, but we don't know what they do with them. Whatever they do with them is completely on them. And you say, well, obviously they're committing a genocide with it, right? And so I think that comparison works here.
Oh man, that's a fantastic comparison. Because, by the way, it didn't just sentence your family; it sentenced everybody who's in that apartment block to death. It would say, well, this is a high-value target. He was a Hamas dog catcher. He walks into his apartment building, and so we are okay with killing 100 people to get that one guy. Meaning that the program would correlate that information and give them the score about how many deaths are we okay with to get this one person. Like, I don't think people realize how extensive this is. Add to that, people talk about China and how anywhere you go in China, you're being videotaped, monitored, and everything else. This is something very similar. I mean, how difficult is it to add in video cameras? How difficult is it to track location data, track cell phone data, to track where the person is gone? And even more creepy, what happens to people who the government just doesn't like? Like, meaning the moment you get on the government shit list, What does that look like if the government decides, let's look into something for this person? Like if this was around during Martin Luther King's time and they were like, we need to find someone on that guy. Could you find something on that guy? Or find something on somebody who was bugging you as a political dissident in your country? I think people need to be very clear on where this goes. And it is dark. It is very dark. I agree with you 1,000% on this.
Can I just make one more point on this? And that is the effectiveness of these systems. Is, I think we kind of assume that they are generating these credit scores and they're actually hitting members of Hamas, but I'm very doubtful of that. I think, a lot of these people, maybe they have a cousin who's a Hamas official. Maybe, right. They just happen to live in a neighborhood where 2 or 3 other Hamas members live, and so you interact with the people in your neighborhood, you interact with your family members. That doesn't make you a part of that organization. And actually the U.S. tried to do something like this during the Afghan war, during the surge, and Gareth Porter has done some fantastic reporting on this, basically saying that once you start to hit wrong targets, right, and you always assume that you hit the right target, right? So if a name comes up on a list, you take out that name, you check it off, and you say that person was connected to Hamas. Well, right. Then every person that person is connected to is now being said they're connected to Hamas. When if this person was never really connected. So once you start having bad inputs in these systems, it compounds very quickly, and you're able, to kill a lot of innocent people. So I'm very worried about not just the system being in place and if it works, but even if it doesn't work, once it's in place, it's very dangerous.
Yeah, I don't think people get the gravity of it. When this story came out, it was kind of like a shrug. And it's like, hey, you guys are shrugging for something. This is a bad corner to go down. Like, I am very concerned when AI gets fused with technology like this, and who's going to be operating that AI and for the reasons that they're operating it. Oh, I am very concerned. I've a perfect example. One of the things that they released when Joe Biden left office was that Joe Biden was trying to basically generate lists of people who were, let's say, dissidents. And going through social media posts, going through bank account information, and I guess coming up with some kind of score for the person that would determine whether they get certain jobs in the federal government. Is that really what we want? Like that, like the notion that the federal government doesn't, like, I guess my concern is political opposition to the government. It's American as apple pie. And are we going to get to the point where that is no longer the case? I mean, look at what Trump is doing around the issue of Israel, where he's literally deporting people for having an opposition point of view on that issue, where they are trying to criminalize opposition point of view. I mean, the boycott and divest sanction thing, for example, in various states where they were trying to pass laws to criminalize your right to not do business with Israel, or for that matter, speaking out against it. They were trying to pass this nonsense through law. Whether it got struck down by the courts is irrelevant to the point. The fact that they tried to do it, it's so anti-American, it is breathtaking. What does it look like when you add AI to that faculty, or you add Foundry to that faculty with Social Security? Hey, maybe we don't want you getting Social Security. Maybe we don't want you getting access to Medicaid. Maybe we don't want you to get access to food stamps because we don't like your point of view. I just think this goes into a very dark place. So I thank you for your article on this, highlighting it. Do you want to say anything on this? Because there's another story that you came up with that I want to hit, but last comment on this.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And, even if it's not like they just outright deny your Social Security, but they say anybody with a score below a 30 or something like that, you have to reapply every 6 months, and they just put you in a bureaucratic hell. Right. Yeah. Anybody who's may had an older relative, they help to apply for one of these Social Security programs, knows it's a pain in the ass. It's a lot of work to register somebody and get them signed up for that. And so if they're having to redo it every 6 months, is going to be completely exhausting and just require a lot of work. And it's, I'm sure, going to force just a lot of people to give up and say, well, I don't have the energy for this. It's too complicated. end up kicking a lot of people off of the rolls of Social Security and other programs. And look, I'm a libertarian. I'm not for any government spending or welfare programs, but I'm more against. I strongly oppose and realize the bigger threat here is the attack on the First Amendment and requiring people to hold certain political positions to have access to these programs is worse than just allowing people, everyone to be on them, you know.
And by the way, the IRS, like Nixon used to use the IRS as a political weapon to go after his political opposition. Is this a backdoor into being able to use systems?
Absolutely.
Like
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm sure that, you know, imagine if you audit your political opposition or people who donate to certain 501c3s, right? Let's say they decide that people who donate to antiwar.com, oh, you know, we got to look at you and give you an audit. That certainly, I think, would dissuade people from donating to certain kinds of independent media outlets. And again, this is all ways that could be done. Just harassment to the point where people capitulate because, you know, being a dissident is at times, you know, I guess like culturally expensive, right? Where you could lose some of your status for being outspoken on the war in Israel, particularly just after, or the war in Gaza, particularly just after October 7th. But they're trying to make it financially expensive as well, and you know, cut off your access to different programs and things like that.
Yeah, that's creepy. That is very creepy. I mean, leaking data, that's the other thing. Like, who knows what information can be leaked when the federal government has access to that stuff behind the scenes because it can collate all of this information. Yeah, that's creepy, man. That is very creepy. Yeah. Great story. One of the other stories you hit is, it's not shocking to me. An argument is being made that I don't accept, that the deep state has surrounded Donald Trump and that Donald Trump is boxed in by the deep state. So senators push bill to endorse major sanctions against Russia because they are trying to get Russia to accept Donald Trump's nonsense, quote unquote, peace deal. And effectively, you get Lindsey Graham, who is acting as if he's the president, going over to Ukraine, Pompeo going over to Ukraine, if I'm not mistaken, and it's effectively pushing for sanctions and pushing Trump to apply these sanctions. Now, I am not of the mind that Donald Trump is pushing for peace. I don't buy it. We can disagree, fair enough. But what he's put out is so ludicrous that I can't come away with the assessment that he wants an actual deal. Even though I think if he could get a deal on his own terms, maybe he would. Lindsey Graham's not for that. Many of these neocons are not for that. All of these guys want is perpetual war, meaning they want Trump to keep fighting that war, keep funding that war. You get Democrats and liberals who are like, hey, this is fantastic. Donald Trump should, you know, immediately get behind this deal in order to put more sanctions on Russia to keep this war going. Give me your take on this. Like, I'm fascinated by this element where Trump is being moderately, okay, I'm trying to back away somewhat for this because I want to focus on China. And their response is, nope, we're not leaving this. We can do both.
Yeah. So, yeah, and on Trump's policy here, obviously, Trump, if he's boxed in, it's because he's allowed himself to be boxed in.
Right.
He could pick up the phone at any point in time and call Vladimir Putin. He could set up a meeting between the two leaders. A lot of what needs to be done to end the war in Ukraine has far more to do with the U.S. military posture in Europe, war games, NATO war games that approach the Russian border, NATO expansion, and things like this, where I think if Trump went to Putin and said, we are willing to move. One of the most provocative things that the U.S. has done is they put the Aegis Ashore missile defense system in Poland and Romania. These systems can also fire Tomahawk cruise missiles and present a major strategic threat to Moscow. And I think if Trump picked up the phone and said he was willing to negotiate on those issues, he was willing to take permanent NATO installations out of the Baltic states to end U.S. and NATO war games in the Black Sea, then I think Putin would probably be willing to make some concessions on the ground in Ukraine. Now, he's not going to return all the territory, probably no territory that Russian soldiers hold, but the war could end that way. Trump could circumvent this entire neocon apparatus, Zelensky, all these people the Europeans who don't want the war to end, simply by picking up the phone, calling Vladimir Putin, and making a coherent argument for a peaceful resolution. He's incapable of doing that. And so is kind of being boxed in. I think his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is in league with he was a member of the Senate just a few months ago. So remember that. So he's in league with all of his former senators. This new sanctions bill on Russia has 80 co-sponsors. I couldn't believe it. And when does legislation ever have 80 co-sponsors?
And by the way, it's insane economically. The notion that you're going to put sanctions on India and China to do what, 500%?
Yep.
Is insane. You're just alienating two of the largest countries on the planet.
Lindsey Graham called it the most draconian bill he has ever seen in the Senate. Like it seems like it should be a joke that they're threatening to pass this, but they really are. And the Senate is looking to move forward with it. According to The Guardian, the Trump administration is going to try to walk the line by telling the Republican senators to vote your conscience on the bill. And since there's 80 co-sponsors, obviously it's going to pass, and then Trump will sign it into law, right? The House supports it. And so, I do think there's an effort here by Graham and Rubio, and they've had like a couple little tricks they're playing, right? So the first one is the minerals deal. And I think this is probably the most key piece to this, because this is how they're going to sell Trump on sending Ukraine more weapons. I think they're going to invent a whole bunch of companies in Ukraine that will never turn a profit, that will never mine any material, but they're going to sell half of the value of those companies to American firms, and then they're going to take that money and go to the Trump administration. They're going to say, President Trump, I've raised $3 billion. I want to buy more weapons. Trump's not going to say no to that. During his first administration, he sold tons of weapons to Saudi Arabia because he thought selling weapons and making weapons deals made him look good. And so I think that's what we're going to see here, where they're pushing forward with the sanctions bill. I think the only good news is that it probably can't be implemented. The 500% tariff just sounds absurd, and that it's just not a practical number, right? If it was a 50% tariff, it would almost be more concerning to me, because at least that could take effect. But a 500% tariff is absolutely absurd. Also, a lot of the oil that Russia is selling to India is being refined and then shipped to Europe, and so the Europeans are going to suffer from this as well. So I just don't see this actually having any practical effect. And Russia has weathered all the other sanctions maneuvers that they've tried over the past 3.25 years now. So it seems so foolish, but Trump seems ready to move forward with it.
It's cartoonish. I mean, it's every bit as cartoonish as the tariff war, right? 140% sanctions. Okay, this is even higher by a magnitude of like 5.
Yeah.
And so it's like the notion that you are telling sovereign states, hey, you can't do deals on your own with another sovereign state. And if you do, we are going to hit you with a 500% sanction. Are you out of your mind? And you really honestly believe that India and China are going to be like, okay, well, we have to follow America's dictates. You really believe that? What is it going to do to the world's oil markets? What is it going to do to the price of oil in the United States? It is going to go through the roof. Meaning either they don't get that. Like, it's one thing if you use it as a threat. Okay, but the threat is even so ludicrous that you're almost like, do it. Let me see you do it. Let me see you implement that. Have at it. Let's see what that looks like in real life, right? But do you really get the sense that effectiveness and competence is something that comes out of Washington?
It's getting worse administration by administration, right? Where the first Trump administration was fairly pathetic. The Biden administration was unbelievably pathetic. And the new Trump administration is not only pathetic, but also filled with a lot of morons, right? Yeah. Like, Antony Blinken was obviously quite a bit more intelligent than Marco Rubio. And there's a few other examples you could make of that, where even if the policy was evil under both administrations, the people trying to implement that policy and come up with it. Kristi Noem, right, recently couldn't articulate what habeas corpus was. right? Like just these kind of examples where, look at Pete Hegseth, right? This guy has a Twitter, a signal chat giving information, Pentagon information, battle plans to his wife. I mean, it's a level of incompetence that's really unbelievable, right? I often say that if you were writing a movie script, you had to revise it because they would say like, this is too heavy-handed. We get that you're trying to make the point, but make it more subtly. And that's just how incompetent these people are at this point.
It's idiocy. It's the movie. Ted Rall and I were talking about this the other day. It's like idiocy, the movie, like where the IQ of the nation has gone down because stupid people kept breeding, smart people stop having kids. And then you got like 100 years and the president is like a wrestler. You've never seen this movie? It's a cult classic. It's and a random man, average intelligence, ends up into the future because he is like a hibernation tank by accident. And he's like the smartest man on the planet because of oh man, it is.
I haven't actually watched the movie. I do remember, back in the day when you actually watched like network TV, I was watching something in the beginning came on and I just had to get up and go. But I have seen the promo for it and get the plot.
Watch the movie. You will be shocked at how very similar things have gotten, where you're like, there's no way. And it's like, yes way. They don't know anything. Like, and the sad part about Trump is I don't think he knows anything. I get the sense that somebody comes, and Kellogg, for example, I would say, hey, this is a plan that Putin would accept. And when Putin says no, he's confused. But my guy said he's accept this. My guy said this was a good deal. My guy said this. My guy said that. I don't think two things. For one, presidential policy typically doesn't really care. They have an objective that they want to accomplish. And us as a hegemon looks at it as, well, the world is just going to do what we tell them to do, or we're going to put pressure on them. Diplomacy is no longer a thing in regards to the way that the U.S. government operates. So there's that. Two, I don't think he knows anything about any of these issues in real terms. He has a constituency that he needs to effectively please, and he works on that model. And so I have a bunch of neocons around me. They want me to do this for Iran. So I can't accept the deal from Iran that Iran has said is a red line. And so I need to keep plugging in a direction, despite the fact that I have no progress to make on this. I want to make a deal with the Russians. I said I was going to end the war 24 hours. That was always a lie, but whatever. I'm going to try to end the deal. Oh my God, the Russians are not going to accept my plan because from their point of view, it's existential. And we've been pushing NATO up to their border. He seems completely confused by all of these conflicts. I'm going to have a trade war against the world. I'm going to have these random sanctions or random tariffs. And then when the world looks at this and says, are you out of your effing mind? The bond market flips out and he has to back away. And then he gets pissed off and they call him Taco Trump. Like, this has been a cluster of an administration. I mean, give me your take on that. I mean, maybe I'm being, some people may say I'm being too brutal. I don't think I'm being brutal enough, frankly.
No,
and one last point. And as a libertarian, I am very curious on your take on this. Putting $20 trillion on a $36 trillion debt.
Yeah, well, I'm opposed to this spending. I'm for massive government cuts. Of course, corporate welfare first. That what needs to go is the tens or hundreds of billions of dollars that's doled out to the Pentagon contractors every year, and then major haircuts to particularly U.S. agencies and departments that just, the CIA, the intelligence community, the Pentagon, all need to have significant cuts to even, and I do agree with like some of the Doge cuts when it comes to foreign aid and things like that, which I do think are largely corruption projects in foreign countries. The rare case where they actually have a hospital that's giving out vaccinations, sure, don't cut that right away. But most of what, these NED type organizations are doing are regime change operations, are regime propping up operations meant to help placate the population in those countries so there's a more favorable government in the capital city so their foreign policy matches what the United States wants. So on Trump though, I do oppose most of what he's doing here. I think I generally agree with you, where he doesn't have a deep understanding of the situation. I think if he would never be able to sit down with you or me and have a conversation on what the U.S. military posture is in Europe, like what, other than NATO expansion, what provocations has the U.S. done in the continent over the past 3 decades that provoked Russia to invade Ukraine. He doesn't know this stuff. He seems to often know things in the kind of slogans that he says and repeats. At times this means you get little details on conflicts that you wouldn't normally get, talking about how high the death count is, how many people are dying in Ukraine. I think when he said there was like between 1.5 and 1.8 million Palestinians left in Gaza, I think that was probably a serious estimate that he had gotten, and that's like the only fact he knows. So he's just repeating it over and over again.
That would mean
he just doesn't know very much, or certainly doesn't know enough. I think that's the case.
That's unfortunate.
My general thinking on Trump is he doesn't know a lot, and when he does learn things, he learns it in slogans, one point at a time. And it's good that he does know that point, and it's good that he tells the American people that point at times, but it's just unfortunate that he doesn't understand the situation deeply enough to actually resolve it, because again, as we kind of talked about at the top of this story, it really would require a lot of presidential action and weight to end the war in Ukraine. He can't just tell Marco Rubio, Witkoff, Kellogg, I want this war ended. They're going to lie to you. They're going to undermine you. The same way during his first administration, he said he wanted to remove the troops out of Syria, remove the troops from Somalia. And what happened? His administration, the officials that he hired, right, the people who worked for him, just lied to him and manipulated the situation, and we didn't get out of it.
Trump was president once. And so, that's why I don't give him a pass on this. It's like, dude, you were president once.
Yep.
You believe that the people were lying to you, who you've hired and brought around you. And yet you filled your coffers with a bunch of neocons and lunatics. Again, I mean, you can say Gabbard, but Gabbard apparently is trying to do a picture book for him for national security briefings, which is just humiliating because Trump doesn't read, apparently, which is astonishing. The president of the United States doesn't read. But you brought in Kellogg. You brought in Huckabee as the person for Israel. You brought in all of these people in whack jobs. I mean, do you think that's what's happening? That they're effectively undercutting his plans in the context of his administration? I don't. But again,
yes and no. I think there's a lot of yes men and people who just go along with the policy. I mean, this is apparently even what's happened with Tulsi Gabbard, right? The advantage of having Tulsi Gabbard as the director of national intelligence was supposed to at least be that she could recognize the difference between a Sunni and a Shia militant in the Middle East, which means in Yemen, the threat is Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, not the Houthis. And yet Trump spent billions of dollars in 3 months bombing Yemen, killing hundreds of people against, again, a group that is opposed to Al-Qaeda. Now he's embracing, now that Assad is gone in Syria for his first administration, remember, he was a key player in the regime change in Syria. So now that the Bashar al-Assad government is gone, sure, he was a dictator, but he wasn't a dictator who ruled based on jihadist beliefs as the new leader Abu Muhammad al-Jolani does, and suddenly we're embracing Damascus. It's absolutely absurd that we're seeing the policy we are with even Tulsi Gabbard in there. So I mean, that suggests to me she's just somebody who falls in line on these issues, and that's why I say on the Signal chat she wasn't really arguing against and doing everything she can to prevent the U.S. from bombing the Houthis. No.
In fact, Vance seemed to be less enthusiastic about it. He was a team player. He was like, look, I'm a team player, but if this is what you guys want to do, but this is not our issue. We only get 3% of our stuff through shipping through this region. So why are we doing this? And yet, here we are. Here we are. Last point. What do you think of MAGA on this? I mean, I don't like either political party. I think both are cults. And I think cults are problematic either way you look at it. Like, you have a president who some of the stuff I agree with. No tax on tips. Fair enough. Put more money into the hand of people who need it, right? We're going to end the war. Thank you. Why are we spending hundreds of billions of dollars pushing for another Cold War that could end up in a nuclear war? Like, meaning some of this stuff I fundamentally agreed with, and MAGA seem to agree with. Trump gets in office and he doesn't do it. Or he puts it forward in a way that has no chance of, it's like if I'm offering to buy your car and you and I engage in a negotiation. And I said, I give you $1 for it. And if you don't give it to me, I'm gonna break your knees. And you say, okay, well, I'm not, what kind of big deal negotiation is that? That's the deal, that's the negotiation. And then I pull away and say, okay, well, he's not interested in negotiating. Okay, but the premise was so ludicrous that there was no way, that's not a real negotiation. That's not a real engagement. And I know as a libertarian, I would imagine your belief is a negotiation is any deal that you can walk away from. Meaning it's not compelled through force. It's we're making a deal that is in mutual best interests. MAGA doesn't seem to get that. And whether it's this anti-American stuff on Israel, where we would go after people's First Amendment rights, whether it's the stuff of not ending the war and his deals that he's putting forward that have no chance of succeeding, they seem to be in lockstep with him all the way through, every bit as much as Democrats were in lockstep with Joe Biden, even though he was weakened at Bernie's. It's frustrating to me looking at this level of political capture. I don't know what's another word for it.
Yeah.
Give me a take on this. Or do you see them weeding themselves away, or at the very least taking issue with some of the things that he's doing?
I mean, yes and no, right? I think the majority of the MAGA movement are really just Republicans, right? And they, like rank and file Democrats, just they vote red, they support red, whatever said on Fox News, whatever the White House press secretary says they're going to be opposed to. I do think there's like an interesting phenomenon within the MAGA, the leadership of the MAGA movement, and a part of the MAGA base where they are legitimately upset about some of the things that Trump is doing. Elon Musk just came out against the big, beautiful bill. That's, I think, notable.
Right.
If you look at even the MAGA reaction to the, Glenn Greenwald video that was released, a lot of them were like, he's gay. We all knew he was gay. I don't support the gay things that he's doing, but he's a fantastic journalist, and it's wrong that somebody released this to try to silence him. I do notice on social media, say Mark Levin posts something about how, everybody is anti-Semitic if you don't support Israel. There is a lot of young Republicans in his replies absolutely annihilating the old man.
Really? I could see Bannon flipping out too. Yeah.
I do think there are certain places where they're willing to deviate from Donald Trump more publicly than at least I notice on the Democrat side when, say, Joe Biden in office. But that being said, I don't see them actually taking the steps to hold the Republicans accountable, right? Which means at the ballot box. Replies to Mark Levin on Twitter, polling that shows half of young Republicans don't support sending weapons to Israel are I think real and meaningful changes that shows that the MAGA base is willing to deviate from Trump to some degree. But unless they're voting Republicans out of office, like Mike Johnson, like the Senate leader John Thune, then I don't think it's really Lindsey Graham's another example. Then that change isn't going to have any actual effect, even if the thinking has altered some from the Republican base.
Permit me to ask you one more question on this, because I'm fascinated from a libertarian point of view on this. Oftentimes when I'm talking to people, they tend to be on the left, not Democrats, but on the left, like the, let's say like working, not even the woke left, workers left, where they want this kind of lefty policy in regards to workers, Medicare, Social Security, et cetera, increase in wages, those type of things, abundance left. We have often on the left come to this assessment that this is a captured process, that the political process no longer works. It no longer produces people who are competent. It produces people who are effectively craven. The richest man on the planet went after Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and even if you don't agree with those things, at the very least, that is something that is there and has been there for a very long time, that is in the interest of, at the very least, the poor and middle-class Americans, that most people, when they hit 65, they're going to depend on and they're going to need. the richest man on the planet decided to crush those things, firing American workers, taking what the Republicans are trying to take like $1 trillion out of Medicaid in order to give tax cuts to the top 1% and 0.1%. Meaning this is, and put this stuff on the public purse. So the fact that they're putting $20 trillion in order to give people money is pretty astonishing. But that's the way our government has become. It's, if you ask the American public, are you okay with that? The majority will say no. If you ask them if they're okay with tax on tips, they would say, yes, we like that. Put hands into the people of the money of the people who need it. Most people work service jobs. Those people get paid trash. So if we can indeed help them, fair enough. And every lefty I know that is also for it. The other way, not so much. But that's the political instrument. And that's the people that this political instrument puts out. The Israel thing, the majority of Americans also have said, we need to stop sending weapons to Israel. This is outrageous. Piers Morgan, for God's sake, has been dragged onto the side of saying, okay, Israel has gone too far. When you lost Piers Morgan, you've lost the plot, right?
Right.
And yet, the political instrument doesn't produce people who say, we need to stop sending weapons and money to Israel. They're committing a genocide. The political instrument no longer works. It seems to be captured. So say, for example, you vote out Lindsey Graham. Who would you put into his place that would have any kind of political benefit that would be to the detriment or to different than the current policy and the way that Washington runs? And the answer is nobody. Then you're screwed. Like, I don't know a way out that box because it doesn't seem to work. I can tell you on the Democratic side, where Democrats sitting in the thing say we can lie, cheat in a smoke-filled room and choose whatever candidate that we want. That's what they were saying in court when they were cheating Sanders in that race. Trump, they didn't have to deal with superdelegates, so Donald Trump was able to win. If it wasn't for that, though, if they had superdelegates, Trump would have been taken out every bit as much as Sanders would have been taken out. So how do you move forward in a political process that seems to be effectively captured by a certain class on either the right or a certain class of either on the left? I don't know way out the box.
I mean, I largely agree with you that there's typically not political solutions to these problems, at least not through traditional and federal level politics. I mean, when I was coming up in the Libertarian movement, it was the Ron Paul 2012 campaign in the Republican Party. They stole a primary from him. I think he won Iowa that year, and they just lied and stole it from him. At the time, all the libertarians would post the memes online where Fox News would rank the top 5 Republican candidates. Number 1, number 3, number 4, number 5.
Yep.
Number 2 was
Ron Paul was number 2. I remember that. Yeah.
And they wouldn't put him on the screen. All the debates, he would absolutely annihilate the competition with the least amount of speaking time. Right. And so I saw how rigged the political process was. Now, I guess 2 points that I would make where maybe there is some room for optimism, or the reason why it may be beneficial to vote out somebody like Lindsey Graham is, if Lindsey Graham gets voted out, he has 99 colleagues in the Senate who do take note of that, right? Who these people want to stay in the Senate forever or get promotions to the federal government, right? They don't want to be voted out of office. And so if Lindsey Graham is voted out of office, particularly if it's over a certain political issue, not because of some set scandal, not because of, people just generally dislike him now, but let's say he's voted out specifically based on the war in Ukraine or the war in Gaza, then again, it's probably not enough to like flip the other 99 members, but let's say 3, 4, 5 senators get voted out over a course of a couple of years. I do think you would start to see at least some rhetorical shift in Washington, and probably a little bit of a policy one too. I mean, it took a couple decades, but now most members of Congress will say the war in Iraq was a mistake at the very least, if not go further in their criticism of that. And then the last point I would make here is I think the Libertarian Party actually did some good work on the transactional level during the last presidential election, where there was something of an endorsement by the Libertarians of Donald Trump. I didn't vote for the guy. I know a lot of Libertarians who did. And one key figure in the Libertarian movement, Ross Ulbricht, who, from the libertarian perspective, was arrested for designing a website where people were able to trade goods that may not have been legal according to U.S. law. But at the same time, from the libertarian philosophical perspective, adults should be allowed to exchange drugs for money, no matter what those drugs are, and not face persecution for that. And so,
by the way, I agree with you on that. I don't think drugs should be illegal. I know a lot of people disagree with that. I don't think people should be put in a cage for using drugs. I'm sorry. Please continue.
Yeah, but anyway, my general point is that you see around the world, because I'm into foreign policy, so I see other elections, and a lot of times countries have more parliamentary systems where they elect a certain number of Knesset members who then get together, form a coalition, and get a prime minister. And so this means that say in Israel or something, the prime minister's party isn't the same party as the defense ministry, the finance ministry, the national security ministry, right? All these are different, and there's exchanges made. It's very transactional. And so certain members, they get pardons, they get other concessions, and I do think that could be a way forward for people on the left pressuring the Democrats, people in the Libertarian Party primarily pressuring Republicans to make certain concessions. Of course, we're not going to get a lot. All politicians lie, and so for all the hopes that libertarians had around Doge, it's completely failed. I am more than willing to acknowledge that. But getting Ross Ulbricht freed, I think, was the first victory that libertarians have had on the federal level, maybe ever. And maybe this is a path that, again, people on your side of the aisle, people on my side of the aisle could go down to try to get some even minor policy changes, because at times, minor policy changes could have massive impacts. It's easier for me to think about on the state level, like getting rid of some of these job licensings where you have to have a certification to braid hair or to cut hair or, do all kinds of other things, which it's almost all cultural anyways. Like, this shouldn't be regulated by the government, and getting rid of those kinds of laws can make massive differences in people's lives and in people's community. Some of the zoning rules that I think prevent neighborhoods from growing in the way they should, let's try to make some changes and things like that. And I think it can be done.
Fair enough. I accept that. I do accept that. And that's the thing with libertarians. There is overlap between what would be considered the left, and I don't mean Democrats. I just mean the political spectrum of the left, and especially on the stuff of anti-war. I mean, I have Dan McAdams on the show all the time, the Ron Paul Institute, and from the Ron Paul Institute. Speaking of it, and he used to tell me that there used to be a coalition of anti-war right and left that used to dovetail on certain issues, and somewhere along the way, it just fell apart. So, Cal, thank you for this, man. I hope this wasn't too much of a pain. I really appreciate you joining me on this great conversation. And just so the audience would know, Cal Anzalone. I'm horrible with names, which is why I'm being very careful when I pronounce. I butcher names in a heartbeat. Cal Anzalone. He is opinion editor for antiwar.com, news editor for the Libertarian Institute. He hosts the Cal Anzalone Show and co-hosts Conflicts of Interest with Connor Freeman. You started the Libertarian Institute page, correct? Or am I getting this wrong?
Scott Horton is the founder and director of the Libertarian Institute. I would say, like, in the first, half dozen of people who worked at the Institute, I was probably there pretty early on after it started.
Okay.
About a decade ago now. I think 2015.
By the way, great work. Thank you for this, man. You be safe, okay? Have a good one.
You too. Thank you.
All right. Great conversation. I really appreciate him joining me for us to have a talk. Like I said, there used to be a right-left coalition on the issue of war. It's like on the things that you agree upon, why not form a coalition on those things? We could fight on other stuff. But the Palantir thing is terrifying. The Palantir thing is terrifying. Let me go to the chat first before I move on to the other one. Jamal, if we were to email your requests for recommendations of books and links to learn to be decent at chess, would you respond back with recommendations? Of course. Of course. People email me all the time. They email me stuff about travel, medical stuff, mic stuff, misspellings, screw-ups. They email me all the time. The answer is yes. So Laugh66. I will absolutely email you back. I am not an ivory tower. I walk amongst you in that sense. But yes, the answer is yes. One of the what is this? Somebody says another great show. Oh, thank you, Ezra Khan. By the way, before I get to the next segment, Andrii Telizhenko, that was a hell of an interview. That interview should be required watching. The narrative that the West has gone with is, well, Russia was just being an aggressor. Vladimir Putin wants to take all of Europe. And he always wanted to invade Ukraine. He was chomping at the bit to do this. Nothing can be further from the truth. And when you listen to him, what he is saying is some pretty mind-blowing stuff. CIA and whatnot were already in Ukraine. When the government was overthrown, they were already trying to figure out how could we put agents, sleeper cells, in Russia in order to destabilize the country. That's before the war. That is after they overthrew the government. So they were already gaming and scheming of how to provoke a conflict. Now, I said this before with the William Burns memo, "Niet means niet." Well, William Burns points out, if we continue to agitate in Ukraine about NATO membership, going back to the Bucharest summit in 2008, then this is going to create effectively conditions for a civil war that Russia would have to get involved in, whether it wants to or not. So William Burns understood, okay, this is not something Russia wanted to be involved in. They're not going to have a choice but to get involved in it. You are expanding NATO to the border of Russia at this point and building up a massive military on the border. This is going to be unacceptable. You're trying to do something very similar with Georgia and trying to create a second front. This is going to be considered unacceptable. And Russia will get involved, meaning you are provoking them and pulling them into a war. They knew it. And the thing I used to ask was, okay, did they sleepwalk into this? Was this a Hobbes choice? Talking about people correcting me. People do use Hobbes choice, and I know it's called Hobson choice, but people do use the term Hobbes choice. Is it that where either you let us put NATO on your border, a hostile military organization with a bunch of fascists heading that country, or you allow yourself to be surrounded, or you get involved? Which one is it? Do you want to get involved into military conflict, or do you want to let us expand to your border? By the way, this is the exact same situations that they're putting China in, right, with Taiwan. Either you let us pry Taiwan away from you in the way that we were able to pry Hong Kong away from you during the Opium Wars. And I noticed the Brits. Either you allow us to do that, where we salami slice the one China policy to the point where Taiwan is an independent country. We've effectively ripped it away from you and turned it into a military base of our own. Or you get militarily involved. Which one do you want? Both of those are bad choices. Both of those are impossible choices. And it's not impossible, obviously, because Russia just got involved. But I'm saying that if you're a country that is not looking for a war, and one country is agitating consistently that is either war or we're going to use a propaganda campaign to make it look as if you're the aggressor, or you let us put NATO on your border. What is your choice? There is no option between those things. There is no, there's no skating. There is no option in that. You either militarily get involved or you allow it to happen. Same thing with China. Either you militarily get involved or you allow them to take Taiwan. There is no intermediary. There's not a 0.5 somewhere in that. It's 1 or it's a 0. And so his point is, we understood, everybody understood when the government was overthrown that this was going to lead to war. We got it. They were putting cells in Russia to do exactly what they've been doing, either with those drones, even with those bombings, either with those attacks, that they had been planning that stuff going all the way back to 2014 and maybe even before 2014. That is what he said in this interview. He was there. He was there. So he's not speaking about this from, I read this in a book, he's speaking about this from personal experience. And even the Zelensky thing, where Zelensky gets in and he says, yeah, Zelensky actually did want peace. And somewhere along the way, he goes have a conversation and the Brits tell him, we'll give you all the money in the world. You're going to be able to beat the Russians. You're going to be in NATO. You're going to be in the European Union. You're going to, we're going to give you a pony. You're going to be able to fly with wings of gold to the moon. They tell him all of this stuff. He's an actor. He's not a political figure. And he sees somebody sits across him with a suit, and they're telling him all of this stuff. And he's like, wow, you're the Brits, you're the Americans, you're the whatever. I believe you. And he goes down this pathway, flipping all of a sudden from the candidate that people elected, from a peace candidate who didn't want war, to the guy who we see now, who's messianic, who believes as a religious rationale, like somebody believes in Jesus, that he is going to somehow prevail in the end, despite all evidence to the contrary. That's astonishing. That's astonishing. Now, Andrei's point is that whether he was lied to or not is secondary to the point that he's gotten all of these people killed and continue to get all of these people killed, and is effectively running a dictatorship where he has put political opposition in jail, murdered political opposition, or people just left the country because they were terrified for their life. And any notion of having political opposition media, any notion of having political opposition in general is off the table, going along the way with elections. Okay, if that is not a dictatorship, I don't know what is. And even if you could have elections where Klitschko is like, hey man, this feels like he's, doing this in order to cut political democracy in this country. Dude, you were part of the government that eliminated democracy in Ukraine when you guys overthrew Yanukovych government in 2014. So the idea that Klitschko is screaming about democracy is breathtaking. Absolutely, entirely, completely breathtaking. And yet they'll do it. He's not talking about democracy as an absolute. It's kind of like, the US said we're a free country. We're a free country for capitalists. We have a certain ideology and mindset that as long as you're fish in water, you don't really see the water. But the moment that you take issue with it, say, hey, I think you're taking advantage of these people, it's just corrupt government, then you see the water. The jig is up. I'm saying from the Klitschko point of view, yes, I'm okay with this Banderite government. But even in the context of the Banderite government, you are squashing political opposition. And political opposition being the band of lunatics and Nazis that we have at our disposal who make the decisions and who would constitute somebody who may actually be able to take power because we've effectively eliminated and marginalized Eastern Ukraine. It's an astonishing interview. That's all. I was curious about Zelensky's point of view and framing what was in his mind. And as he said, look, don't try to get into the mind of a cocaine head or a drug addict. Fair enough. But Zelensky has a certain tact about him where he makes these speeches and people are like, how is he saying that Europe must give him money? How is he saying that the US must give him money? That is very weird. You must give me weapons. You must give me money. You can't just leave. That's not fair that you just leave and abandon us in the war. That's the stuff that he says when he's on camera. And if you think so, okay, well, why is he saying that? Why does he feel entitled to money from Europe? Why does he feel entitled to money from the United States or weapons for money or from the United States? If indeed he was promised, we're going to give you all the money and the weapons, you're going to become a billionaire, you're going to be able to get a house in Florida or Paris or wherever else, you're going to get all of these things, your beautiful wife is going to get all the clothing and the money that she wants, you're going to be protected, you're going to be blah, 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 blah. If you were told those things, and fast forward to 3 years, where your country has been carved up, you've lost 700,000 people. Many of your people are broken and maimed or lame at this point for missing limbs and whatnot. Your cemeteries are overflooding. 20-30% of your country is gone. The Russians are sitting across from you saying, not just this, we want more. Meaning these are now part of the Russian Constitution and you need to leave from this territory. Some of that territory is the most expensive, the best areas of Ukraine, gone. And now Trump is like, we're leaving. Now, I don't believe he's doing that, but if you're Zelensky and you're saying all of this stuff was for naught, everything that you told me, none of it came to pass. And not just none of it came to pass, not only did we not beat the Russians, we're losing people hand over fist. We're losing territory hand over fist. We have no capability of stopping that Russian onslaught. Whereas you told me that their military is going to collapse. They've built up 2 additional militaries full of equipment, and it's outpacing the amount of weapons you can provide 3 to 1. This is not what I was told. So you can imagine from that point of view, he's looking at it saying, you must give me money. You must give me weapons. You must give me these things. Whereas at this point, they're like, dude, we're politicians. We lied to you. You need to accept the fact that we lied. Now, Europe doesn't want it to stop because, for one, they want to keep feeding Ukrainians to the Russians with this idea of bleeding Russia. It has nothing to do with Ukraine. It has everything to do with bleeding the Russians. That was the entire premise of the war. That was the entire premise of getting Zelensky to provoke the conflict in the first place, all of which they knew was going to be a provocation. So when I used to ask the question, did they sleepwalk into this or did they do this knowingly? Decisively, they did it knowingly. That interview with Andrii was fantastic. Fantastic interview. I want to get to something else. I've been deeply annoyed. I know I said it a lot, but it's true. At mainstream media that has just been accepting what Donald Trump has been saying on the issue of Ukraine. You get this, for example, this terse exchange with the White House press secretary, where truth comes to die.
On Russia.
Listen to this. These people are just propaganda speaking for the White House. And by the way, and make this point clearer, do you remember Count Smirkula, Matthew Miller, that disgusting troglodyte of a trash human being, if everyone existed? He was recently doing an interview where they pointed out, yeah, I think Gaza is a war crime. I think Israel has committed many war crimes. And they said, but you would never say that at the dispatch box. No, it's not my job to say it at the dispatch box. Basically, I am following the policy of my principal. And so my principal put me up there to lie. So I went up there and lied, even on something as disgusting as the murder and the burning alive of children. That was my job. So when you're listening to the press secretary, you must listen to her in that context. This is not about informing the public. It's about telling the public what the White House wants you to know. Those are very different things. Truth and reality is different from someone telling you what they want you to know. Keep that in mind. So this is press secretary for Donald Trump. Listen to what she says here when she's asked the question about, did the White House know about Operation Spider's Web?
More on Ukrainian drone attack on Russia. Was President Trump informed in advance by Ukraine that the attack is coming?
He was not.
And then she moves on. Next person. Next person. Few things. The question probably should have been, did the president know that this was taking place? Was the president involved in this taking place? Meaning, I don't need to be read into something if I'm already involved in the thing that's happening. There's that. So that could be an honest answer to the question. No, nobody informed the president that it was taking place because the president already knew it was taking place. He didn't have to be told in the sense of Ukraine telling the U.S. Also, we are supposed to believe that Ukraine was able to pull this off without U.S. intelligence. CNN was reporting that Hegseth was watching it. The U.S. knew. The White House knew. I don't believe for a moment that the White House didn't know. Also, we are supposed to believe that Donald Trump, who continuously said, if I can't get these sides together, then I'm going to walk. I'm going to say all of you are horrible people, and I'm just going to walk. I'm going to leave. I'm going to leave Ukraine's devices. That's not a threat to Russia. That's a threat to Ukraine, right? Russia would prefer you to walk. That's what they want. They want to end the war. And the longer that you give money, support, logistics, intelligence, etc., the longer the war continues. You signed a mineral deal. This is your Lend-Lease agreement, where money is probably not going to be accumulated for 30 years. That's assuming that it's even accumulated then under the auspices or this idea that you're going to continuously give them weapons. You just couldn't justify to MAGA giving it away. So you came up with a scheme to make it look as if you're selling it. Okay, you're still giving them weapons. Whether you're selling to them, whether you're giving it to them, same difference from my point of view. And so with Donald Trump, who said he is going to walk, an enemy combatant, by the way, who's in this, paying money for it, intelligence for it. He's fighting the war. He's a belligerent. He's an enemy. Trump says, I'm going to walk. That threat is decisively aimed at Ukraine. Why was Donald Trump going to walk? If I can't get these two sides to make a deal, then I'm going to walk. Okay. So you walking is predicated on this idea that you can't reach a deal. Fair enough. You force Zelensky to go and have talks with Putin after Putin said, okay, let's have talks in Istanbul. And the day before the talks, they murder several people on a train in a terrorist attacks, multiple terrorist attacks on trains, by the way. And they directly hit nuclear triad of Russia, basically the nuclear deterrence. Okay. They go after Minsk Bridge, meaning they're doing all of the stuff around the same time of negotiations that they put negotiations. Fair enough. You're Donald Trump. You're claiming that you're going to walk if you can't get a deal. And your proxy, the one that you give money, intelligence to, and everything else, has just done something that is radically provocative and that makes it clear to any rational human being they obviously don't want to deal if they're doing that. Okay, fair enough. What does the White House do? Where is Trump's tweeting? Where is Trump coming out making statements like, this is fucking outrageous. I can't believe they're doing that. I'm going to walk. They clearly don't want to deal. Silence is deafening. And I'm pointing out that the silence is deafening because the White House already knew. And that the entire point of this is a pressure campaign against Vladimir Putin. Where it's like, okay, Putin doesn't want to accept my deal. Well, this is the best that I can do as a US president because I'm somewhat of a weak leader. And so I gave him this nonsense deal that was totally ludicrous. I want to increase the pressure on the Russian government, but I also want to be seen as a deal maker, despite the fact that I'm a belligerent to the conflict. And so I'm going to have a shadow war under the actual war that I'm already waging. And in that shadow war, I'm going to pretend as if I don't have anything to do with it. Zelensky has gone rogue, despite the fact that the premise of me walking had everything to do with Zelensky not being willing to make a deal. Now, the catch becomes, do we honestly believe that a president who has premised his walking on Zelensky not being willing to make a deal or not being willing to engage, that Zelensky is going to risk the president walking when Europe and Kiev are desperate for Donald Trump to stay involved in this and to get money, weapons, and everything else because they themselves can't carry that burden? Are we really to believe that Zelensky is so brazen, bold, and confident? The same confident Zelensky that went to the meeting despite the fact that he didn't want to go because Donald Trump told him to go or else. That same Zelensky has gained some level of superhuman confidence where he's willing to have these attacks just before negotiations without concern about the ire of Donald Trump walking away after he does these attacks. I'm saying Zelensky wasn't concerned because Zelensky knew that the fix was already in. The White House already knew. That's my point. That's a hell of a provocative move to make if you don't know what Trump is going to do after you do it. And if you're assuming that the White House doesn't know, if the White House gets pissed off at you because you did that and Trump walks, then you've damaged your capacity to wage war and you've effectively lost the war even faster than you're losing the war now. Under no circumstances do I believe for a moment that Zelensky would take that risk. Nor do I believe that the Europeans will push him to take that risk of Trump walking because of what they were doing. The only way he would do this is that the U.S. Trump administration, the White House, was already in on it, and he fully understood he was insulated from Donald Trump walking after he did it. It's a pressure campaign. I'm not sure why the U.S. media, all of a sudden, who calls Donald Trump a liar under pretty much every other context, at this point, it's like Trump is clearly telling the truth. Does he have an incentive to lie? Yes. Would a habitual liar lie when he has a complete incentive to lie? Yes. It doesn't even make sense otherwise. That's a hell of a risk. If you don't know what your principal is going to do, it's not a risk at all. If you do know what your principal is going to do because your principal is in on it. There's that. The other thing is this. This is Kellogg. Now, I want you to see this, and I want you to look at this in the context of Joe Biden. Israel, Joe Biden comes out, Israel's murdered 40, 50,000 people. Joe Biden is being pressured by it because it seems outlandish. And Joe Biden says, if Israel goes through Rafah, there'll be consequences. AOC comes out and says Joe Biden is working tirelessly to deal with the issue of Israel and Gaza. Blinken sent to Israel 30 different times. I am a Jew, as he says when he goes to the Middle East. And yet I'm negotiating for some kind of deal with Israel. And then you find out after the administration that all of our thoughts were true. They weren't negotiating squat. Under no circumstances did Joe Biden push Israel to do anything. In fact, Israel went so far as to say, thank God Joe Biden was president. God was looking down on us in a favorable light with Joe Biden as being president, because Joe Biden didn't stop us from doing anything, didn't push us for anything. So for all of the proclamations that was coming out of the White House saying that Joe Biden is working tirelessly, Joe Biden is doing this, Joe Biden is doing that, all of it was lies. All of it was lies. Lies for political expedience. So when you see Kellogg come out and say this, my point to you is that you should look in the exact same light as Joe Biden talking about working tirelessly for a deal to end the war, Israel's murdering of civilians in Gaza.
And I'm telling you, the risk levels are going way up. I mean, what happened this weekend, people have to understand in the national security space, when you attack an opponent's part of their national survival system, which is their triad, the nuclear triad, that means your risk level goes up because you don't know what the other side's going to do. You're not sure. That, first of all, it was a very bold attack. And when you do that, it's very clear the risk levels will go up. And I think that's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to get to a position where the risk levels are going so high that this thing will expand. And that's where we don't want to be.
So you're right.
And so what we want to do is prevent risk levels from going up. And we can prevent those risk levels from going up if Vladimir Putin just accepts our ceasefire and all of this stops. That's the logic that they're running with. We need to put pressure on Putin to get him to do something he doesn't want to do, which accept a nonsense deal that Kellogg himself is putting out there. And so Kellogg comes out as a confidence man and says stuff like, yeah, NATO expansion was a problem. Okay, okay, we knew that. We already knew that. You think just because you're saying it, that we somehow look favorably upon you? No, you're an enemy. We don't care if you say that. We already know that's true. And you get him saying, that was a bold attack by Ukraine, bold attack. And it's upping the ante. So we're trying to get to a point where that's no longer in the cards. And how can we do that, Kellogg? By going with my 20-point ridiculous nonsense plan. That's what we can do. If Putin just accepts our plan, all of this stops. We're not bombing the Kerch Bridge anymore. We can freeze the conflict. We can stop going after, facilities. We can stop the bombings. We can stop these operations against the triad. We can stop all that stuff. We can stop the escalation if Putin just accepts my deal. That is the logic that they're running with. Trump doesn't want to say it because Trump is trying to get a deal. And the moment that the White House acknowledges that it knew about this, all hell breaks loose. Two reasons. One, how do you try to get a deal when you're going after the nuclear assets? There's that. Two, the reason that those planes were out there, for one, was because of a deal between the United States and Russia that we will keep satellite imagery of our nuclear arsenal, meaning we need to keep satellite imagery of your planes and you'll keep satellite imagery of ours. So it was U.S. intelligence that they were using in order to know where those planes were going to be, because the U.S. keeps monitor of those planes all the time. I'll get my point. So the moment that you allow Ukraine to do that, and you acknowledge that you allowed Ukraine to do that, you've effectively said, we used a treaty obligation as a way of hitting the Russians, using Ukraine as a proxy to do it. Okay, that's a big deal. Under treaty obligations, we had to expose this information. And you use that treaty information to give your proxy a way of attacking us and hit us in a way that tried to damage, our air bases and our capability of delivering nuclear weapons, and even our ability to detect nuclear attacks. That's a big fucking deal. So, of course, the White House is going to lie about it, because the White House doesn't want to open the can of worms of, we leveraged information that we agreed with the Russians to expose in order to allow Ukraine to hit their planes. President can't say that. President doesn't want to say that. However, the president knows that Putin already knows it. The president knows that Putin knows that he knows it. And what the president is hoping is that Putin will somehow, I don't know, back down, wither away, make a choice of, okay, I'll accept his nonsense deal now that he's attacked these assets. Dude, you do not know the quantity you're dealing with if that's what you think. You don't know the quantity you're dealing with. I want to bring in our guests. I guess I just want to make the point very clear. Trump knew, the White House knew. This is why the deafening silence, all logic points to them knowing. And for the media organizations or for social media analysts who are coming out effectively saying that Trump should call Putin, Trump should de-escalate, Trump should do this. I hate to tell you, stop drinking the Kool-Aid. Trump is already involved. Let me go to my guests. I am joined with the man himself, KJ No, a favorite of mine and a favorite of my audience. KJ is a journalist, political analyst, writer, and teacher specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia-Pacific region. He was contributor to the book, Capitalism on a Ventilator. It was censored by Amazon, but you can get it at iacenter.org. KJ is also on the China Report on Breakthrough News Network, a fantastic outlet with a fantastic host. How you doing, KJ? You doing okay this morning?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I am doing fine. I am taking issue with some of the media reporting coming out of the United States, but otherwise, no issue. And I guess that's kind of normal. That's why I have a job in the first place, right? I just think some of their reporting is farcical. So two things. And I guess the first thing, oh, by the way, one more thing for the audience. And you can laugh at this too, KJ. The same guy who I was just showing Kellogg, who was like, oh, that's a hell of an escalation. This is Yermak in Washington, because Yermak is coming for more weapons, sanctions, money, and all this other stuff. And here is Kellogg, who called it unfortunate, but Ukraine was the wing, hugging that same Yermak. Just great. Just great. KJ, let's start with South Korea. South Korea has a new president. South Korea has a new president. Now, what do we know about this new president? I can imagine that Yoon Suk Yeol, he stunk up the office to the point where the opposition most likely won. From my understanding, he's moderate on some level. So the expectation is that he's not a puppet of the U.S. in a way that the previous president was. I think I have a picture of him already up, so right here. It's this gentleman who won the presidential election. And I would like you to give us a little bit of details. The name is Lee Jae-myung. Is that right?
Correct.
I nailed the name. Excellent. Okay. But this is the gentleman. What do we know about him so far?
So Lee Jae-myung is he is the leader of the Democratic Solidarity Party. They call themselves the DP, but they're the opposition party. They're the ones who impeached Yoon Suk-yeol and then eventually got him, out of office. They are a center-left party, and Lee represents a kind of populist wing of the DP. So a little bit of his personal background, which I shared before, but he originally grew up dirt poor, just so poor. His parents were cleaning toilets.
I'm sorry to interrupt. That's the guy you were talking about. Okay, yeah. I remember you explaining this. Please continue. I'm sorry. Okay, I remember.
So he, just absolutely dirt poor in one of the poorest countries in the world. After he graduated from grade school, he went and started working in a sweatshop because his family was so poor that they, couldn't put food on the table. His sister and his mother, cleaned toilets for a living. And at the age of 12, he went and started working in a sweatshop, making plastic items and then later baseballs. So, if you have a baseball from that era, it may have somehow touched his hands. But, if you're 12 years old and you go into a sweatshop, that's like being sold into a brothel, into a whorehouse at that age. You never come back from that because it is such a debilitating and destructive profession to get into. By the time you're 18, you will not have any fingerprints because chemicals have burned off every trace of your ridges. So when you go in to get your ID, you cannot even fingerprint yourself properly. And by the age of 40, 45, you'll be dead from cancer from all the chemicals. So he started working in a sweatshop, and he was injured twice. His left arm was pulled into machinery, and it was crushed. So, he's also, disabled. But despite this background, working in a sweatshop, he somehow managed to get himself into a night school. So he's, you're working a 12-hour day, a 12 to 16-hour day, and then you go to a night school for 2 to 3 hours and you try and get some additional education. And through this process, he was able to pass the middle school equivalency exam and then the high school equivalency exam. So working in a factory, he was able to, graduate from high school by passing equivalency exams. And then he won a full ride scholarship to law school in Korea. In Korea, like in many countries, law school is an undergraduate. So he graduated as a lawyer, got a full ride, and then he took the bar exam, aced it on the first try, and then he became a labor and human rights lawyer. And then from that, and, already there, he is a 1 in a million. People who start working in factories do not become lawyers. That's just unthinkable. They don't, their academic life, the intellectual life is dead. But anyway, he got into law school, became a human rights lawyer. And then he started working himself up the ranks, and he became the mayor of Seongnam City, which is like a major city just outside of Seoul. It's a very important city, like New Jersey to New York or something like that. And there he instituted a lot of populist policies. And then he ran for governor of the city, the province surrounding Seoul. So it would be like becoming the governor of California. And eventually he was elected there. So he's come up the political ladder, he's paid his dues, gone through all kinds of hardship, ran for Yoon Suk-yeol in the previous election, lost by 0.7%, which is just a fractional margin, the tightest margin in the history of Korean elections. And this time he ran again, and he trounced his opponent by about 9 percentage points. So clearly a landslide. But this, at the core is a very, very strong rebuke to Yoon and the martial law that he was trying to impose, and everybody around him who wanted this kind of dictatorial structure. So it's a big sea change, and people are jubilant. They're out in the streets dancing, but we're not out of the woods yet, because this is a very, very important high stakes election, because it affects the U.S. geostrategically. So you can be sure that the daggers are still out. You can be sure that there'll be further disruptions, further twists and turns. Yoon was Washington's perfect partner. Lee Jae-myung has said, very directly that he's going to balance with China, and that he's going to look out for South Korea's interests, not for the U.S.'s.
I'm sorry, I was pulling up the thing. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Talk about an overreach. God, talk about an overreach. Like because I think the audience needs to understand a larger context for this. The United States comes out screaming that North Korea is involved in the war. Okay, well, North Korea ultimately was, but North Korea was on Russian territory involved in the war, meaning the security agreement that they had with North Korea allowed them to help on Russian territory, but they never invaded Ukraine. They were always on Russian territory. So the US is screaming this at the top of their lungs. They have a patsy in South Korea who decides around the exact same time, I'm declaring martial law. and not just declaring martial law. I'm going to effectively kill my political opposition, and I'm going to somehow blame the North Koreans as if they're the ones that are responsible for doing this. And I'm going to say they're Chinese spies, they're North Korean spies, they're spies everywhere. And so I must do this, a plan that they had planned out for months on end. And there's a question about whether or not he did this because they didn't trust, let's say, the parliamentary opposition to the U.S. will, and they wanted more troops to be able to help Ukraine in the war, which if you can make the argument that North Korea is involved in the war, maybe you can get South Korean troops into the war also, in which case, as you pointed out, the U.S. takes control of the South Korean military in cases like this where the military gets involved. Now, the South Korean people, thankfully, flipped out over this and fought tooth and nail with their own lives, by the way, at risk to protect the democracy of South Korea. He has stunk up their office to such a degree that the opposition ends up winning. And this guy, who is a 1 in a billion a political figure and success story, ends up taking power in South Korea. That's astonishing. First, is there anything I said that's wrong? There's that. But two, that is an amazing arc that the U.S. has effectively overshot its load.
I think you're absolutely right. The U.S. has overshot its load. It's brought about exactly the opposite that it wanted. Remember, when Yoon was elected, they were so jubilant and so happy in Washington. It was Christmas in Washington. He was a walking wish fulfillment list. And he was walking wish fulfillment list. Rand called him the U.S.'s perfect partner. And they called him the perfect partner. And Rand doesn't use that type of language very often, but they called him the perfect partner because he was the perfect partner for war. Because he said that anything the U.S. wanted as far as waging war on China was concerned, he would do. He would make an alliance with Japan. Japan is Korea's former colonizer. He said, "Oh, no problem. We'll embrace our former colonizer. We'll get into bed with our rapist," right? I mean, that's what he said. And then he also, escalated in every way possible. 250 days of military exercises. Military exercising meaning rehearsals for war on the Korean territory every year, and including 20 strategic nuclear bombing exercises. And then he was joining every U.S. alliance possible. He said that, he was willing to be part of AUKUS and NATO, and, they set up a NATO liaison office, everything. So he really was this walking wish fulfillment list. And leading up to the martial law declaration, he was actually trying to provoke a war with North Korea. That is to say, he sent drones towards Pyongyang, and we know how dangerous that is. And we saw, what happened recently in Russia, but they were sending drones into North Korea. They fired 900 missiles into a contested territory that North Korea considers its own. They were setting up a false flag attack, claiming that, when South Korean legislators were killed, that this was the work of North Korean agents. And they, appropriated 170,000 North Korean uniforms made to look, perfectly realistic in order to, create that lie. And yes, I believe that he was ready to provoke war with North Korea and use that as casus belli, in which case the war against Russia there would have been a horizontal escalation, because North Korea is an alliance partner with Russia. They have a mutual defense treaty. So if South Korea goes to war against North Korea has a border with Russia along, its northeastern tip. And therefore, Russia, it would have been a kind of horizontal escalation for Russia, as well as the possibility of sending South Korean troops who were trained in cold weather warfare, trench warfare, joint arms warfare, NATO interoperable. It would have sent those troops possibly into Ukraine as well, because we know that the manpower issue is on the Ukraine side, not on the Russian side. Now, the thing about North Koreans fighting in Ukraine, that was a lie. They were fighting in Kursk,
In Kursk, right?
in Russian territory. And everything that they said at the time about North Koreans was wrong, except for the fact that they were fighting. We don't know how many, they were not impoverished, starved people, soldiers who had been sent there without knowing where they were going. And they were, running into the battlefield, naked, like human waves, I mean, this is just absolute mythology, absolute lies, right? So 99% of what was said about North Korea was a lie. But inside there was a small kernel of truth, was that the North Koreans were observing and learning from the battlefield. They joined the battlefield on their initiative, not on Russia's request. And they were trying to learn some of the modern tactics that were happening. And then apparently at some point later along the line, they were actually engaged in direct combat. And these were not, impoverished schoolboys who were stunted and eating dog meat in cans, etc. All of that ridiculous stuff. These were highly trained special forces. North Korea sent some of its best, and they sent them to get some direct combat observation and experience.
That stuff is so racist. Running into the battlefield naked. It's like, get out of here. The Russians are fighting with shovels. Their morale is so low. The North Koreans are being forced, and they're eating dog meat and sent out there with no proper uniforms. Like, the stuff that they say is so just rabidly racist.
It's so
No, go ahead, please.
No, I mean, it's so over the top. And so when you hear that kind of stuff, because it's so packaged in lies and exaggerations, that it's hard to get to the truth. And there was a tiny kernel of truth, was that they were there. But everything else around them was complete and total fabrication.
Is there a chance for rapprochement with North Korea, with this president, or that is off the table in general? Like that's politically impossible in the current political situation?
Most of the left progressive parties in Korea, including the DP, are actually favorable towards, at the very least, de-escalation with North Korea.
Okay.
And some of them are open to rapprochement and even eventual, the long-term hope is reunification. So I would put Lee Jae-myung in that category. Certainly he's warm towards North Korea. One of the charges against him that, of course, they were using endless warfare because they wanted to knock him out because he was their major contender. They raided his house 300 times, like SWAT raided his house. Yeah, no, I'm not kidding you. They SWAT raided his house 300 times, turned it upside down because they wanted to find something on him. So, he was living through that hell for years. And one of the charges, all the charges were ridiculous. They said he lied during campaigning. Like if you did that, every politician, in the West would have to be arrested because, that's just the nature. But anyway, they said something that he said, and then they interpreted and reinterpreted. And then they said it is possible to construe this as misleading because somebody might misunderstand it. Therefore, he lied. Therefore, we have to put him into prison and keep him from running. So this was the kind of stuff they were trying to throw at him. But one of the charges was that he had, sent gifts to North Korea. By the way, through like an underwear company, that there was an underwear company that had, been used to send money indirectly.
The American people are.
I'm sorry. No, I'm listening. It's just outrageous. It's shocking to me. 300 times,
Yes.
and there was no outrage in South Korea over that.
Well, there was.
And by the way, I was listening to you. I was pulling up a video, so I was listening. I wasn't. I heard everything you said. It's amazing to me that there wasn't. Oh, you said there was outrage over
There
him doing
was
that.
outrage, but they couldn't do anything about it because Yoon Suk-yeol, the former president, the impeached president, was the prosecutor. He was the, you know, he was like the attorney general of South Korea. And
That's
so
amazing.
he had an entire army of prosecutors behind him. And he said when he was initially campaigning, you know, several years ago, he said that he would turn the country into a country of prosecutors, which he did. So he's prosecuting all his enemies, including Lee Jae-myung, including, you know, the top leaders of the opposition party, some of who are in prison right now, and also, you know, prosecuting trade unionists and anybody who was involved in peace work or, you know, trying to get, you know, Korea to de-escalate against North Korea. All of them were prosecuted.
One last question on this. Are they going to take Yoon Suk-yeol's head?
Are they going to take his head? You mean he's what's going
Will
to
he
happen?
be executed for what he was going to do? He should be executed.
He-
And that is a hard-ass perspective, but to be very clear, the notion that you're going to try to A, start a war, so you're going to get a lot of your people killed. B, you're going to go after your political opposition, have them killed or disappeared in order as a provocation. Like all of these things are so beyond the pale, with a large death toll associated with it, even killing his own people to do it. That seems outrageous to me. How's the death penalty not on the table?
It could be on the table. Right now, he is in court. He's in court standing trial for insurrection. So he's already been impeached. He no longer has presidential immunity. He's no longer the president. Lee Jae-myung is the new president, and he's starting yesterday. But he's standing. Yoon Suk-yeol is standing trial for insurrection. That is to say, treason. And the penalty for insurrection is life imprisonment or the death penalty. So technically, it's possible that he could be executed. But I think realistically, first, it remains to be seen whether he will be found guilty. Yes, because it looks like the judge is trying to throw the court case. One of the first bad signals was first he was released from custody, which is not something you do when you have somebody that is that dangerous. You know, he had pretrial detention, but he was released from pretrial detention. And then the second piece is that they are not allowing any cameras into the courtroom. Which, yeah, it's not good because given the magnitude of the charges and the importance of the you know, historical and political process involved, you want to have witnesses to it. But he has banned all cameras from the courtroom. And so I feel that, you know, there's some, you know, some very, very untoward things happening inside the judicial process. Other people have also pointed this out, but we'll see. At least he's standing trial. At least he's no longer president. Will he be convicted? That remains to be seen. I think the case is an open and shut case. I mean, essentially, you only have to answer two questions. Did he declare martial law? Yes, he did. He's on television declaring martial law. Did he do it under, you know, using military force? Yes, he did. Was he justified in military force, and was he justified in declaring martial law? You know, a child could tell you no. But there's a lot of, you know, as for lack of a better word, there's a lot of kind of deep state maneuvering around him. And you can see that, you know, there's a lot of kind of erasure and cover-up happening right now.
I will tell you this. If George Bush had been tried, convicted, and executed, the behavior of the presidents that came after him would be different. And it is vitally important that this takes place, just to show the president is not a king. The president can't declare no martial law willy-nilly in order to take the country to war. Like there are rational reasons for doing this. It's like, you know, somebody kills somebody. Okay, well, what is the reason that you prosecute the person for murder? A, we don't want this to be normalized in a society. And B, you need to do it as a governmental entity to show that there is some consistency within the context of our laws. In general, but also you don't want the public to take matters into their own hands. In the place of a president, though, that has that much power, meaning, Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility, right? The country is trusting him with that power and is saying, we're going to bestow this power upon you to look out for the best interests of South Korea. And you take that and turn it against the country itself in order to hijack the country, to provoke a war, and potentially to send your people into a front that they have nothing to do with and that is not in their best interests. Not to mention, again, killing potentially your political opponents. The jailing of your political opponents is problematic enough. And so it requires the state to say, the president is not the state. That this goes beyond this idea of this guy being a political entity itself. It goes into what happens in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. What statement do we set? Of statement of principles. And statement of principles is set by his conviction. We should have did it to George Bush when George Bush pulled that shit with Iraq, and we didn't do it. And every president that came after it was fair game. So if Obama wanted to go into Syria, nothing to stop Obama from giving money to a bunch of terrorists to go rummaging through Syria to try to overthrow the government. If Trump wants to steal the oil, Trump can steal the oil. There are no consequences. If Obama wants to have these endless wars, he can do that. Like, meaning there's a philosophical, legal, and ethical principle that is built into holding, especially somebody with that much power, accountable. That should be done. And that I deeply regret that they didn't do it in the United States. If they do it to him, God bless him.
Well,
God bless.
I believe that they certainly should have been punished. I mean, Noam Chomsky is on the record saying that every U.S. president since the end of World War II should have been hanged according to, the Nuremberg laws. I mean, this is
Right.
international law. You engage in aggressive war. That is the ultimate crime. It's the crime against peace. It's the crime that contains all the other crimes. And so all of them should have been, if we were to apply the Nuremberg standards, should have been hanged. But I'm not somebody who believes in the death penalty per se. I think there is a good argument for punishment and re-education. And I believe that that is actually more of a kind of salutary effect, if you will.
I accept that. I accept that. I'm not a big God, man. Covering this stuff is making me far more brutal than I think I would be under normal circumstances. But it's a pragmatic reaction to the environment that I guess I'm floating in. That guy was going to get a lot of people killed.
Yes.
Let's be very honest. George Bush got 1 million people killed. Do I want to re-educate George Bush? No. He had no compunction about sending Americans to die. He had no issue with having Americans kill other people in Iraq. He had no issue at all with creating, like, uncorking ISIS, going rummaging through the Middle East, killing and chopping off heads. This was a direct result of his policy and U.S. policy to reshape the Middle East with American might. Do I really want to re-educate him for all of that? No. If I'm being brutally honest with you, no. No.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Chomsky standard, is a justifiable one, but also, just a little historical footnote, not insignificant. It was Cheney and the neocons that were driving this. Bush was, the kind of front. He was the figurehead, the front man for this, but it was, Cheney and his neocon troop, who are still essentially, the neocon project is still ongoing, and back in the 2000s under Bush, they actually wanted to start not only a war with Iran, because they believed that only little boys go to Iraq, real men go to Iran, but they also wanted to start a war with China. So it goes back as far as then. And now here we are again, and we're looking at imminent war with China, or Pete Hegseth calls it, China is an imminent threat, and we are preparing for war.
He said, if the president tells me we will fight and win a war against China over Taiwan, that's astonishing. And I give me about 2 or 3 more minutes, because I do want to show the speech for Hegseth. This is a lunatic, deranged, out of his mind, alcoholic, giving a speech to the Asian nations. And by the way, when he was there, notice he didn't say anything about South Korea. Like, he named all of these other nations that he expected to help him out, contain, and apparently fight China. South Korea was not part of that list. South Korea was not part of that list. At least I don't think it was.
But do you know when he did mention South Korea? 4 months ago, at his confirmation hearing, Tammy Duckworth asked him to name an ASEAN nation. ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. He asked him, name an ASEAN nation. And he named South Korea and Japan. And she had to flat him down and tell him, those are not ASEAN nations. They are not in Southeast Asia. So we're doing, on-the-job education for, the Secretary of Defense. And he's going to learn by going to war or waging war. So, I mean, this is the terrible, scary thing, is that we get people who, just don't even have basic knowledge, just, kindergarten level of geography. And then they are going to make decisions that affect the entire planet, including Southeast Asia and Northeast Asia.
Yes, amazing. This is Hegseth given one of the most deranged, out of their mind speeches. And keep in mind, every accusation is a confession in this. We're not trying to surround China. Okay, that's a bit weird, considering you have Japan, the Philippines, Taiwan, all of these countries that seem to be surrounding China. Oh, we're not trying to look for aggression. That's kind of weird, since you have U.S. military personnel that are on the island of Taiwan and you're giving them weapons left and right. Like, meaning all of the stuff that he's saying is utterly nonsense. I'm only going to play a small bit of this, but I want to get your take on this before we close. Okay, why can't I hear you, Hegseth?
We share your vision of peace and stability of prosperity. The United States stands ready to work with any country that is willing to step up and preserve the global and regional peace that we all hold dear. Your presence here today sends a strong message about our shared purpose, our shared commitment to peace, our shared dedication to a free and open Indo-Pacific. And as our allies share the burden, we can increase our focus on the Indo-Pacific, our priority theater. You see, here in the Indo-Pacific, our futures are bound together. The prosperity and security of the American people are linked to those of your people. We share your vision of peace and stability, of prosperity and security. And we are here to stay. Any attempt by Communist China to conquer Taiwan by force would result in devastating consequences for the Indo-Pacific and the world. There's no reason to sugarcoat it. The threat China poses is real, and it could be imminent. We hope not, but it certainly could be.
Talk about a person ahead of their skis. This goofball is Department of Defense, a television personality. We think the threat that China poses is imminent. Correct me if I'm wrong. China would never have even countenance going after Taiwan if it wasn't for the U.S. putting troops, salami slicing the communiques, basically pushing and agitating for this notion of Taiwanese independence. Like, it's just, like, that speech is astonishing. Give me a take on that.
Yes. Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. China wants peaceful reunification with Taiwan, who they call their compatriots, their family, essentially. And so anytime, people from Taiwan region, if they get into trouble around the world, who bails them out? It's the Chinese government. If they get caught up in Myanmar, they get caught up in Ukraine, it's the Chinese government that rescues them and flies them home. So, I mean, the Chinese see the people of Taiwan province as their compatriots because they are literally family. And what the U.S. is doing here is it's getting involved in a family quarrel. What is that family quarrel? Well, they had a civil war. After the Civil War, a group of them, essentially the fascist group, decamped to an island and then declared that they were all of China and that the Communist Party was illegitimate. It's a little bit like the U.S. Civil War. During the Civil War itself, After the Confederacy lost the war, they camped off to Galveston Island, just off of Texas. And then they were regrouping, and they claimed that they were, the entirety of the United States. Now, can you imagine? I mean, it's a little bit of a stretch, but can you imagine if China had said to the Union Army and the United States, if you go in to Galveston Island and you try to, reunify your country, we will wage war against you? That would be outrageous. That would be off the charts, insane. But that's essentially what Pete Hegseth has done. Essentially what he said is that, let's remember, Taiwan is Chinese territory. It's part of China. The U.S. recognizes this. The UN recognizes this. The Taiwan Constitution recognizes this. Entire world recognizes that Taiwan is part of China. And Pete Hegseth has said that we will tell you what to do about your own sovereign territory that we recognize as your sovereign territory. It's such an extraordinary violation of international law. So essentially, it is a provocation to war. If you exercise your sovereign rights regarding Taiwan, we will destroy you. And we are preparing for that. That's the message that he has sent right now. And it's such a, extraordinary, belligerent, bellicose, threatening, violation of international law. I don't understand why it isn't all over the media. Hegseth says something wrong. He leaks something on, on an app. It's all over the press, and he's being called out in Congress around this, and he declares war. This is an open declaration of war against China. It's essentially, it's like the concluding argument of a prosecutor, of a prosecutor who's prosecuting for war. And there is no critique of that. Rather, they're saying, oh, he sucked it, he socked it to the Chinese. Good job, Pete, our man. The only problem is, Trump is unreliable. He might not follow through. This is, Time magazine. So it's just kind of extraordinary. Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's effectively declaring Taiwanese sovereign independence. The speech, for all intents and purposes, declares Taiwanese independence. We're willing to fight a war over Taiwanese independence.
Yes.
That is pretty astonishing.
Yes.
That's never been done before. Like, meaning the U.S. has never... when Joe Biden said something like that, it was out there. People were like, oh my God, Joe Biden is really saying that he's going to fight a war for Taiwan. Mm-hmm. Hegseth is effectively saying not effectively, he is saying the exact same thing. Mm-hmm. And if you're willing to do that, where you're willing to say, this place is independent and we will fight for its independence, then by definition, you're declaring it independent. Like that speech is so problematic.
Yes. Yeah. And the extraordinary threat inflation, right? This is why I say it's like the concluding argument of a prosecutor in a courtroom. Like he's saying this, and you can tell it was written by a lawyer. It's probably written by Elbridge Colby, because this is Colby's plan: provoke war against China over Taiwan, gather all U.S. quote unquote allies, really vassals, get them involved in the fight, and then use it to bring down China. This is Elbridge Colby's strategy of denial. But the amount of mendacity and threat inflation that is thrown in there, as you point out, it's all projection. The U.S. is provoking China. It is encircling China. All things that he said are not happening. It is literally encircling China. All you have to do is look at a map, look at the bases, look at the exercises. They're staging the war, the theater of war for imminent combat. This is what they're preparing for. They say, China is going to take Taiwan by 2027. If you ask them to come up with where they got that figure from, they cannot show any proof. It's all of them self-referring to each other. They invented it, and then they're just kind of self-referring to each other and saying, this proves that China has designs. No, China doesn't have a design to take Taiwan by 2027. and then China has the greatest military buildup. No, it has reduced its military by 2 million people since 1985, and within the last decade by 300,000. They're not a belligerent state. Or China, has the world's greatest navy or naval buildup. No, China's naval buildup is about half of that of the United States in terms of tonnage. They have lots of small littoral ships. These are primarily for self-defense. They don't have blue water capacity. So all of these things are wrong. The only thing which is real, again, the tiny grain of truth, is that China is capable of defending itself, and it will defend itself. And it is not going to let itself be choked out and humiliated and raped like it was for 150 years by the Western powers, which is what happened prior to that. That's when 1949 China stood up, and it's made the decision that it's never going to allow that to happen again. And that's why it has a powerful defensive capacity in its own littoral waters and on its own territory. But Hegseth has characterized this as, China is belligerent and doing terrible things. I mean, let's look at just one more example, the South China Sea. They say, well, China has built islands on the South China Sea. Well, first, China claims those islands as its own territory. It has historical records that go back at least 1,000 years showing that it was using those islands. And it has built military facilities and airstrips. But guess what? There are 6 claimants to the South China Sea whose claims all intersect and overlap. And 5 of them have built airstrips. And 6 of them, all 6 of them, have built military facilities on certain islands of the South China Sea. So China is not an outlier there. It's the same as everybody else. And China built its military facilities in response to the U.S. plan of war against China called Air-Sea Battle, which involves choking it off at the South China Sea in order to strangle it, because that's where $5 trillion worth of Chinese trade goes through, and 70% of China's oil. This is part of the plan of war, is to choke China out. They started planning this in 2009. 4 or 5 years later, China started to build some defensive outposts because they knew that that's what the U.S. was planning. And they're pretending that their provocation never happened, and it's China that is belligerently militarizing the South China Sea, when all of them are. And then they also talk about, the Chinese are, attacking ships and threatening other ships. Let's look at this. When you have naval contestations over territory, these get pretty rough. And China is really a Boy Scout in all of this. The NATO nations have gone to war over contested sea territory. We have the October Wars, the Cod Wars. These are like ships ramming each other, weapons being used. These are incredible wars between NATO allies amongst themselves. And if you look at, for example, another claimant in the South China Sea, Indonesia, Indonesia has taken every ship that it has considered to be intruding into its EEZ, and it has shot and sunk at least 370 of them. 370 ships have been shot down and sunk and set on fire by Indonesia alone. China has never done anything like that. The only thing they've done is sprayed water. But this is the thing that they want to make the federal case about and say, China is the big belligerent, without putting it into context.
U.S. has, 800 and something military bases around the world? They are not the ones to talk. They're not the ones to talk. I've gotten to the point where when they say this stuff, it's just language. It doesn't mean anything. The meaning is we're a superpower, and we don't like the fact that you're contesting us. But the truth of the matter is, if China couldn't defend itself, if Iran couldn't defend itself, if Russia couldn't defend itself, all of those would be toppled governments by now. So, like I said, people take their respect at the barrel of a gun. And China, at some point, and this could be the last comment that I get from you, there will come a day or a moment where the U.S. is doing the same thing to China that it did to Russia over Ukraine. And I know it's different because Taiwan is part of China, so it's just that even more outrageous. But that speech by Hegseth is effectively Taiwan is independent. And China, at some point, is either going to have to let Taiwan go or fight for Taiwan. There's not going to be a middle ground on it. They're going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And then they're going to go to Europe and say, oh my God, look at what China did. But there's not going to be a way out that box that I'm aware of. Europe can commit suicide by all of a sudden not wanting to use Russian energy and not wanting to use products from China. Good luck with that. They can do that. I get the sense that the rest of the world, however, is going to see it for what it is. But maybe there's a way out. Maybe China is better and can find a way out of that box.
Well, I think
last thought, KJ.
ASEAN has already spoken out on this. Malaysia and the Southeast Asian countries, except for the Philippines, which is the other stooge. It's going to be used like Ukraine, like Taiwan. ASEAN has spoken out and said, we are not going to choose sides. China is a good partner with us. If you look at all the economic developments that's happening across Southeast Asia, all of that is happening because of China, because of trade with China, because China's helping build infrastructure, and because China is showing the way and the model of development. All of the Southeast Asian countries are benefiting from that. They do not want to go to war with the United States, although the US wants to use them all as proxies and vassals. So ASEAN has spoken out, and also the Gulf Cooperation Council has also spoken out, because they have joined ASEAN and they're in the process of signing more agreements and creating more connection and interchange. All of this is a direct refutation of the US approach, which is bloc forming in order to escalate for war. They're saying no. They're speaking with their feet and with their wallets. But you are absolutely right. What the US is trying to do is trying to replicate what it did in Ukraine against China. And essentially, the original plan was to pull a USSR on China. China was going to be dismembered, opened up and dismembered, privatized and sold to Western corporations. And they, wanted, a Gorbachev, Yeltsin type character. That never happened. They tried really hard. It never happened. But they were thinking, oh, it will happen. China will fall apart. It's going to, dissolve of its own contradictions because, socialism doesn't work. And then it turned out that, in 2008, the capitalist system collapsed around its own ears. And the only thing standing really was China. They had to go to China and with hat in hand and beg for money. Hank Paulson wanted the Chinese to buy U.S. treasuries, and China, foolishly bailed them out. And of course, no good deed goes unpunished. Yep. That's when the daggers came out. That's when they directly started to plan for war against China, because they understood China is not going to collapse of its own accord. It's not going to collapse from its internal contradictions. It needs a good push down the stairs. And so that's when air-sea battle was launched. And then 2012, the pivot to Asia. And then we saw the TPP, which was the economic encirclement. And then continuing up through the Trump doctrine and the Biden doctrine, the Indo-Pacific strategy. All of this is a continuous, unending, momentum and movement towards war. And Pete Hegseth has essentially, made the final case. This is the prosecuting attorney's, final argument in the courtroom. He's saying, we are going to go to war. And he's made that declaration. And it's frightening and insane.
The U.S. empire is going to collapse. I don't know how it manages its contradictions. And the hope is that it does so before it provokes some kind of larger war in this way. And look, I'm not saying that out of malice. I'm saying it just out of, how are you $36 trillion in debt and continuously escalating at $20 trillion. And you're destroying social services. You're destroying, meaning things that are required for a society to function, they don't seem to care about. They seem to care about it when they were in competition with the Soviet Union, but once the Soviet Union fell apart, that need to compete, that need to provide these a contrast seemed to have just vanished. And when they realized they were in competition with China, it never kicked back on. Like it never seemed to click that, hey, they're providing a living. They pulled 800 million people, billion people out of poverty, million people out of poverty. They did, it never clicked. There's something fundamentally wrong with this country. It is incompetent. The leaders that it's making are incompetent. The decisions that they make no sense in the context of what is in the best interest of the country. It's just bizarre. So hopefully we get out of this without us ending the world on our way down. KJ, thank you for this, man. I always appreciate these conversations. The audience loves you to death. We had nearly 900 people here today. So definitely had a really good audience. Thank you for this. You be safe. And just for the audience to know, KJ No, he's a journalist, political analyst, writer, and teacher, specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia Pacific region, contributor to the book Capitalism on a Ventilator. You can get it on iacenter.org. You can also find KJ on the China Report on the Breakthrough News Network. And one last thing before I let KJ go. I would like to congratulate KJ. KJ has been awarded the Serena Shim Award. Welcome to the team. Congratulations, man.
Thank you so much. I'm very, very honored. And I want to point out that you too are an awardee of the prize.
I am.
As well as
just a week before you. That's all. It's like when both of us are born in together.
As well as John Pilger and
yes.
Julian Assange and many other great journalists. I'm deeply honored to be in that pantheon of extraordinary people.
Yeah, I felt the same way.
Journalists.
Yeah, I felt the same way. I had this feeling of when you are right now I'm in Malaysia. And before Malaysia, I was in Albania. And, for the most part, you just work all day. Like you're just in a room, in a box. You spend 8-10 hours either doing videos, cutting videos, doing news, etc. That's just your life. And you don't really know anybody's paying attention to that. You just kind of do it every day like a hamster on a wheel. And it feels good for an award, especially with the pedigree of people who are on it, to acknowledge, hey, we see what you're doing. Good job. It just feels good. So, no, congratulations, man. You kick ass. My audience loves you to bits. And yeah, you kick ass. So good job, man. Thank you for this.
Thank you, Jamal.
Alrighty. All right, guys, we have come to the end. I want to get to my chats before it gets too late. I am beginning to drag ass. My coffee is wearing off. So let's get to these. Alexander G. No. Farbatria, YouTube made me forget what I was trying to super chat. This is evil. I know YouTube would try to throw you off, but too such. I know some people take issue with YouTube's chat. It's not picking on you. It does the same thing for me. Meaning there are things that I try to tweet out that it disallows. So you're not the only one that happens to. As the host of the show, they do the same thing to the host of the show. It's not just you. So fair enough, Alexander. Fair enough. Joe Biden, Blinken, and Miller, etc., should go to prison from your mouth to God's ears. From your mouth to God's ears. Crown Heights, Brainiac. Random thought. It's amazing that the government can get a RICO case against Diddy, which he deserves, but won't do cases against Biden or Zelensky. They deserve it too. You're absolutely right. But this is, if I had to make a guess, it's kind of floats on this thing of like kings and queens. Like there's reasons the kings and queens didn't like to kill other kings and queens. I'll fight a war against you, but all things being equal, we're going to come to some kind of terms. I don't want to kill you because if I kill you, then how are you appointed by God and die? Meaning I don't want to go after somebody who's one of my own. And in a political sense, I would imagine they give a certain amount of deference to people who are in that political space because they themselves are also in that political space. And whatever they apply, it can be applied to them. That's why what was going on with Trump was so outrageous, because under normal circumstances, they don't do that. Usually you don't go after people in a political space when they're doing outrageous shit. You just kind of let it ride. You may complain about it, you may bitch about it, but taking legal action to go after them is very rare. So your answer is correct. Diddy is fair game. Having, 1,000 bottles of lube is humiliating, right? Having these parties where you're effectively fucking people, men and women, many of which don't even know that they've consented. It's outrageous. So yes, but when it comes to like Joe Biden, Zelensky, and some of these other political figures, well, those people serve a role. They serve a function. I mean, they couldn't even go after George Bush. George Bush literally led the country to a war. They wouldn't even go after him. So you can imagine them going after Joe Biden, who they said was not even mentally fit to stand trial. I agree with you. Agreed. And the last one is Lab 66. Jamal, if I were to email you a request for recommendations of books, links to learn to be decent at chess, would you respond with book recommendations? The answer is yes. But I would tell you the way to get decent at chess is not through reading chess, it's to play chess. I didn't start reading chess books until, 10 years in, give or take. Meaning I was in tournaments, I was in all that stuff. I didn't know openings and any of that stuff. It was just, you just learn through playing and you start to recognize certain patterns. Oh, this is called the Ruy Lopez. This is called King's Indian. This is called King's, 4 knights. This is called this. This is the pattern where you sack the knight on h7, queen h4, h5, bring the knight up to g5, which is a mate pattern. Like it's stuff, it just starts to sink in after a while. And when you're playing, the repetition becomes faster. It starts to make sense more. Reading the books do help, especially when you get into like in-game tactics, certain lines that may help in openings in order to understand the purpose of it. Because openings aren't random. They're usually things that they're trying to accomplish in regards to the position and the way the position is set up. So yes, the books that are best are books on strategy. People have their own inclination about what they like. Initially, I used to like books on attacks. As I got older, I started liking books on position. So I had difficulty reading a book by Kharkov or a Petrosian, for example. As I got older, those books became more interesting to me. One of my favorite books is on the King Hunt. Oh, one of my favorites. Very little value in regards to study and education, but very fun to read. Macau Tao's book is bar none one of the best. So yeah, there are plenty of books that would help with increasing gameplay. Many of those books, though, are just reviews of games. Like those are games that people have played that you're reviewing and studying. Those are the ones that are usually the best for understanding the positions that you're going to come across, why they take certain actions in various positions, and informing your own games, if that makes sense. I used to study chess books constantly. It was fun. I mean, you're just effectively reading over games and the thoughts of the person who's playing that game. It helps. But the answer is yes. The answer is yes. And one last one. Karen Owen 88, Deep Truth Seekers, free PDF books, Master and Path by C.W. Ledbetter and by Alice Bailey. I don't know who those people are. Ledbetter sounds familiar. C.W. Ledbetter, why is that name familiar? The name sounds very familiar. Annie Besant, Helene Blavatsky, Benjamin Cream. That name sounds nasty. And Helene Rorich. Rorich sounds familiar too, but Ledbetter sounds familiar. All right, guys, I'm going to end this. By the way, that's not a recommendation from me. That's from Karen Owens. I'm going to close this out. I guess I'm dragging ass. I can feel it. I'm going to tell all of you thank you for joining us. We had a damn good crowd today. I will see you bright and early tomorrow morning. What's tomorrow? Thursday. Ted Rall is going to be here on Thursday. Sarah Bills is going to be here tomorrow. I need to get somebody from the mornings. But you guys have a fantastic day. And signing off, Jamal Thomas Morning Show 168. Signing off. Have a good one all. Be safe.